I'm Yukti Kavya Tripathi from Miranda House, and I welcome you all aboard on behalf of the Bharat Book Club and Historical India to the book launch of India, Bharat and Pakistan, the second book of the Bharat Trilogy of J. Sai Deepak sir. Now this book comes after the much celebrated books of our times, which is India, that is Bharat. Now I feel and I think I really hope that most of us present here have already read the book, and therefore what we thought was it was only viable for us to begin from somewhere where we left off in the last book, which was the Pavna Mantra of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad.
Om asto ma sadgamaya, tamso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityur ma amratam gamaya. Lead me from the unreal to real. Lead me from darkness to light. Lead me from death to immortality.
It is time for us now to begin on an even reinvigorating note, which for today comes for us from Gita, wherein Lord Krishna says to Arjun on the battlefield of Mahabharat, Mai sarvani karmani sanyasya adhyatma chetasa nirashi nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vikajvara. Now Lord Krishna says to a very confused Arjun कि हे अर्जुन, हे पार्थ, अपने सर्व कर्मों को भगवान में समर्पित करके आत्मनिष्ठ हृदय से संकल्प सहित आशा रहित ममत्व रहित होकर युद्ध करो. Now युद्ध in today's context stands for the war of words, not the war of swords. The war against the colonial mentality and morality which pervades our society today. It is the war which we need to fight as the youth. I remember the last time Sir Sai Deepak was here at Hansraj, I asked him a question of what's the future? Is it really going to make a change? And he very fervently and fearlessly said that the walls of colonial mentality will be besieged only if we as youth take charge. It is for us as youth to fight this youth. The youth needs to take charge, and then the leadership of this is obtained by the scholars like J. Sai Deepak sir, and the inspiration for which comes from the works like India, that is Bharat, and now India, Bharat and Pakistan.
Suswagatam, I'm Rashi Taneja from Miranda House. Today we introduce you to India, Bharat and Pakistan, the constitutional journey of a sandwich civilization. This second book of the Bharat Trilogy is as amazing as the first one. This event is being organized by the Bharat Book Club, an initiative of Historical India. Historical India is a community-based wiki platform stimulating an exclusive discourse on Indian history rooted in ideals emerging from the great civilization. It's a platform where one can create and edit articles, ensuring that this discourse reaches the masses by cracking the dynamics of search engine optimization. Equipped with anti-spam detection, vendetta protection, and next-generation features and many other technical functionalities, Historical India has been integrating the latest technological developments to ensure that the content remains foolproof. It also aims to serve as a platform for historical deliberations beyond the digital space. The Bharat Book Club is an organization of students and volunteers who share an enthusiasm for readership and deliberation of ideas. The fraternity of the club has committed itself to research and reading upon historical and contemporary notions of philosophy, tradition, morality, economy, and religion and identity in an academic and enriching way. The Bharat Book Club has a library which has books on diverse ranging subjects of historical importance. It also houses books which have not been put forth in the mainstream discourse but are really important and are of great value to understand the social, political, and historical dynamics of the society. We also have with us Yuva and Advaita Society as our collaborating partners working for the civilizational cause. Yuva, Youth United for Vision and Action, is a Delhi NCR youth-based, youth-run pedestal upon which the effigy of academic, cultural, and social endeavors are carried out. Yuva finds its companionship across more than 1 lakh students, academicians, and professionals committed towards the positive construct of society with the spirit of patriotism. The Advaita Society is a pan-university endeavor that aims to disseminate historical and spiritual wisdom spanning diverse streams in an apprehensible and pragmatic way to the youth. We have also arranged registration desks for the following in the main hall. Do check them out. The author-signed copies of India, Bharat and Pakistan are also available, so please get them.
हमारी भारतीय संस्कृति में किसी भी कार्यक्रम का शुभारंभ माँ शारदे की वंदना के साथ होता है, के आशीर्वाद से होता है। इसी कड़ी में मैं जे साई दीपक सर एवं हमारे दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय के जॉइंट प्रॉक्टर प्रोफेसर मनोज, डेप्यूटी प्रॉक्टर प्रोफेसर सौरभ तथा प्रोफेसर विकास वर्मा, हेड ऑफ हिस्ट्री डिपार्टमेंट रामजस कॉलेज से आग्रह करती हूँ कि वे दीप प्रज्वलन हेतु यहाँ पधारें। हमारी अनुकामना है कि माँ शारदे यहाँ साक्षात मूर्तिमान विराजमान हो और इस कार्यक्रम को सुगमतापूर्वक संपन्न कराने की कृपा करें। उपस्थित श्रोतागणों से आग्रह है, या अपेक्षा है, या अनुग्रह है कि आज के इस कार्यक्रम से जो कुछ भी निष्कर्ष निकले उसको वे केवल विचार व विमर्श ना करें, परंतु अपने जीवन में अपनाने का पूर्ण रूप से प्रयास भी करें। I now request the speaker of the session, J. Sai Deepak sir, to please take the stage.
J. Sai Deepak sir is an engineer turned litigator who is practicing as an arguing counsel primarily before the Supreme Court of India and the Delhi High Court. Over the years, he has been a part of several landmark matters such as the ones relating to Sabarimala Ayyappa Temple and the Sri Padmanabha Swami Temple and Basmati geographical indications. Sir's first book, India That Is Bharat, drew our attention towards an omnipresent influence of the European colonial consciousness, focusing majorly on its religious and racial roots, on the successor state to the Indic civilization that is Bharat, and the origins of our Indian constitution. His second book in the series, India, Bharat and Pakistan, The Constitutional Journey of a Sandwich Civilization, takes this discussion forward and delves into the Middle Eastern coloniality from the rise of Islamic revivalism in the 1740s following the decline of Mughal Empire, which foreshadowed the idea of Pakistan, until the end of Khilafat movement in 1925, which cemented the road to Pakistan.
Adding further to this introduction, I would have to say that there's a chaupai in Sri Ramcharitmanas which says, Sachiv Ved Guru Teen Jo, प्री बोले भयास, राज धर्म तन तीन को, होए बेगे nash. Now this basically means that Sachiv, the secretary, the Ved, the doctor, and Guru, of course, the teacher, whenever they speak with an ill will, with an ill advice, the king, the kingdom goes into a disarray, which in today's context, I think and I feel, and I'm also experienced the same, being a history student myself, happens everywhere in these institutions. However, having said that, it is in these situations that I found that it is the scholars like J. Sai Deepak sir who really set the tone right and are path-breaking, watershed-making people who empower us to shed the colonial garb under which lies the larger-than-life Bharatiya Sabhyata. And therefore, I would now request J. Sai Deepak sir to please unveil the most awaited book. Along with, I also request Vikas Verma sir, Manoj sir, and Saurabh sir to kindly join him on the stage. Can we request a louder cheer from the audiences, please? Now I would request J. Sai Deepak sir to please gift his 2 books to the library of Bharat Book Club on behalf of the Bloomsbury publication. And for that, I'd invite Vikas Verma sir to please accept the books. Thank you so much, Saurabh sir and Vikas sir, for leading the way for historical India.
Moving ahead with the plan of action for today's event, we'll begin with Sai sir's address to the audience, followed by a book reading session. We'll also have a moderating session by the students of Delhi University and a question and answer session towards the end. Audience are requested to please wait here because we also have some special announcements for you guys at the end. Thank you.
Namaste. My sincere apologies. I didn't mean to do a Shah Rukh Khan here by turning up 3 hours for the shoot, 3 hours late for the shoot. It just so happens that there were a couple of arrangements at T3 that were going on today. So that has waylaid my arrival here. My sincere apologies. I don't mean to be late. I don't take your time for granted. Something that the MC has said during the course of her introduction, that this happens to be an age of battle of words. My slight disagreement and perhaps a correction is that this is not an age of battle of words. You're looking at an age of battle of ideas, words, and on the street. And precisely to dispel the notion that the so-called battle of ideas can be won solely on the basis of words is the purpose of this book, which is to basically show that anyone who operates under the assumption that dialogue is the way forward and dialogue alone is the way forward is perhaps missing the point of Bharatiya history. Because my experience of writing this book has clearly told me that as much as we would want to put stock in the fact that this particular civilization believes in the dialogic process, the fact of the matter is those who don't see themselves as part of this particular civilization don't believe in the dialogic process. And therefore, the dialogic process is merely an attempt at providing intellectual cover fire to every anti-civilizational and every anti-dharmic activity as possible. And the moment you present a resistance to that particular activity, out comes the true color. And therefore, this book has been an attempt to dispel the notion that the war of civilizations or the clash of civilizations, whether we like it or not, is perhaps underway already, and is not going to be won exclusively on the basis of ideological victories or political victories. This much has become clear at least over the last 2 years, or at the very least for the last 6 months. One of the reasons that I have written this particular book and I've changed the timeline of this particular book is I consciously believe, and it has been reinforced during the course of the writing of this book, that we are currently living in the age of Khilafat 2.0. And therefore, what is the motivation that drives that particular mentality? What is the modus operandi which this particular mentality employs and adopts to advance its agenda? That has been the exercise behind this particular book. Now, this book has about 9 chapters. You start with the concept in chapter 1, and by the time you're done with chapter 9, you will see the manner in which this particular mindset actions and affects its ideology on the ground. The difference between our point of view and the other side's point of view is that they don't believe in words alone. And therefore, there is a very clear, concrete implementation of the thought on the ground. I am not blaming them for it. I am merely saying they are right in doing whatever they are doing, because that's the way to put your thought into action. The difference is that their actions as well as their ideas are pitted against our ideas and our fundamental way of life. So I agree with the other side's organizational approach. I agree with their commitment to their beliefs. My entire disagreement is our own understanding that it is possible to win this particular battle or to fight this particular, let's say, war of ideology, so to speak, with both hands tied to your back. That's not going to happen. I am not here to stoke any kind of trouble. I am merely saying the trouble has already arrived. I am not creating anything. I am merely asking people to wake up and smell the coffee. So let me read a few excerpts from the book without revealing too much, just so that you understand why this book has effectively left me with a greater sense of purpose and a greater sense of reality, that we are not in the realm of inspirational talks or motivational talks anymore. Please realize that. This is not a roadshow for a particular individual or a particular book. This is a call to action and a call to wake you up, to say that if you still don't wake up, you're looking at less than a quarter of a century before 1946 and 47 revisit us. That is my humble exhortation to the readers of this book. So let me read a few extracts. And I genuinely hope that apart from creating a certain thirst for history and a reading of history and a proper understanding of history, you see this not as an academic archival exercise where I'm simply looking at an analysis of the past. I am trying to connect the dots of the past with the present, and I'm asking you to ask yourself, what is so different between what happened in the 1920s and what's currently happening now? Because if you do not wake up to this particular reality, you are bound to draw comfort in municipal election victories, assembly election victories, and parliamentary election victories, which practically has proven to be of zero consequence when it comes to protecting your necks from being severed from your bodies. That is the reality of the situation. It is as hard as it gets in terms of its reality. So with this in mind, let me read a couple of excerpts, and I genuinely hope that your questions are sharper, more practical, and more solution oriented, and hopefully which point to a greater degree of investment in the society as opposed to outsourcing the job of protecting your life, property, family, and civilization entirely to the state. So let me just start with this. And one of the things that I've also told people, at least as far as the organizers is concerned, is that the moderators should have at least read some portions of the book so that the questions are specific, not vague. We don't have the time for vague nonsense anymore. We genuinely don't have the time for it. So let me just start with a few aspects here. Perhaps what I'll do is read a few portions from the first chapter before I move to the final chapter, where I speak of how that mentality has actioned itself by way of riots between 1921 and 1924. So the first chapter is called The Seeds of Pakistan. I'm not sure how many have read the first book. How many have? India, that is Bharat. Okay. This is not an attempt to revive the sales of that particular book. It is already doing well, so I don't need to. However, you will make better sense of the second book if you have the conceptual framework of the first book. For the simple reason that I've tried to connect as many dots as possible between the first and the second. In particular, the seeds for the second book have been sown in chapter 6 of the first. And that's what the first chapter of the second book starts with. In chapter 6 of my first book, India, that is Bharat. Just a second. Can you just ask them to be a bit low, please? Thoda aaram se. Disturb ho raha hai. Thank you. In chapter 6 of my first book, India, that is Bharat, I introduced the concept of Middle Eastern coloniality and briefly touched upon its concrete manifestation in the history of Bharat, namely the birth of the idea of Pakistan. I took the view that the creation of Pakistan must be seen as part of Middle Eastern coloniality's long, troubled, and continuing encounter/interaction with the Indic civilization. The violent creation of Pakistan has been the subject of tomes of literature. So to avoid being redundant, I intend to view it through the prism of Middle Eastern coloniality to examine its impact on the shaping of Bharat, especially its legal and constitutional infrastructure. In popular discourse, the partition of Bengal in 1905 on religious lines by the British is credited with sowing the seeds of the idea of Pakistan. This has created the false impression of communal harmony having existed between Hindus and Muslims prior to the employment of the so-called divide and rule policy by the British in 1905. While British motivations behind the partition of Bengal and their subsequent hand in nurturing the idea of Pakistan must and will be examined in some detail, an exclusive focus on British machinations creates the erroneous notion of Hindus and Muslims being equal victims of British rule, drawing attention away from express attempts to restore Islamic rule over Bharat. So how many people have watched this movie RRR? Good. India Bharat to kam pada hai, RRR zyada dekh liya hai. Very good. Okay. Now, what is the period that this movie is set in? 1920s. In fact, in one place they clearly show 1922. And there is a specific poster which says 1922. 1922 effectively marks the second phase of the Khilafat movement. From 1919 to 1924 is when the period of Khilafat is typically traced, although it began before and ended much later. The core period is 1919 to 1924. Now, if you look at the imagery in that particular movie, they show Hindus and Muslims as having common grievances against the British. They are not wrong. It's not historically incorrect. But that is the only period where this honeymoon phase existed. Before and after, it crumbled like a pack of cards. That's the attempt. This is the phase in Bharatiya history when Hindu Musalman ki Jai was actually a slogan. And how short-lived was the life of that particular slogan is the attempt of this particular book, among other things. So whenever Bollywood or any other pop culture constantly refers to some glorious phase of Hindu-Muslim unity, it is only this 5-year period and nothing beyond. So since the 8th century until 2022, you have only a short period of 5 years where the so-called unity has existed. What is the reason for that particular unity? Was it organic? Was it foundational? Was it strategic? Was it convenient? Those are the questions that I try and address in this book. Because you see, it's become very fashionable these days to constantly, even in response to this book, I don't know what people have made of the first book. Some geniuses have written on the 15th of August, and they're trying to reach out to their counterparts on the other side of the border. Oh, my dear Pakistani brother, had it not been for, let's say, the British man, both of us would be on the same side, same culture, so on and so forth. It was only Jinnah, Gandhi, Nehru, and the British who destroyed us. Such rank stupidity, with so much of literature being available, clearly tells you the kind of comfortable notions that we have bought into. I'm sure most people have recently seen that viral video, a short clip of Harbhajan Singh having a conversation with Shoaib Akhtar. Shoaib Akhtar's position is so beautifully clear. Whereas Harbhajan Singh is embarrassing himself with this clawing sentimentality of same culture, same people. He's saying, no, relax. There is a history of two-nation theory. Let's not get into that. Perhaps you may not understand it, which is the case. But then Harbhajan Singh is not an exception, is what I'm trying to say. A lot of people suffer from that problem, that psychosis. So I repeat, while British motivations behind the partition of Bengal and their subsequent hand in nurturing the idea of Pakistan must and will be examined in some detail, an exclusive focus on British machinations creates the erroneous notion of Hindus and Muslims being equal victims of British rule, drawing attention away from express attempts to restore Islamic rule over Bharat. It bears noting that an Anglo-centric approach, which gives Middle Eastern coloniality a free pass in the context of Bharat's partition, is largely a product of the post-colonial school. This therefore reinforces the need for a decolonial approach to Bharat's history to prevent the sugarcoating of facts with generous dollops of post-colonial secularization. To understand the larger backdrop against which the pan-Islamic movements of the 1800s, such as the lesser-known Farisi movement, which was largely limited to eastern Bengal, and the better-known Wahhabi movement, which started in Delhi and spread to different parts of Bharat, were set, we must travel further back in time. A clear understanding of the origins, nature, inspiration, and aims of both the movements and their successors is called for in order to grasp the full extent of the psychology and pathology of Middle Eastern coloniality. I have consciously chosen to write about these movements since their profound impact of the Middle Eastern coloniality's quest to regain control over Bharat is rarely mentioned, let alone discussed in contemporary discourse, out of a misplaced sense of political correctness, also known as Indian secularism. This is despite the Indian Wahhabi movement's manifest and critical contribution to the laying of a fertile ground for Islamism, not just in undivided Bharat, but also in the larger subcontinent, the impact of which is still being felt in one way or another. So these days, if you take a look at, let's say, articles since 1998, multiple people have said Indian Islam is suddenly being replaced with Wahhabi Islam, that Indian Muslims are undergoing a certain degree of Arabization which was never seen hitherto. These are the kind of articles that we get to read. When this has been the trend since the 1700s, the Wahhabi movement in Arabia and its counterpart, its identical twin in Bharat, started around the same period. In fact, most people don't realize the direct relationship between the current regime in Afghanistan and the Wahhabi movement of 1700s, which started in Bharat. So my suggestion or my exhortation through this book has been that whenever you look at the Wahhabi movement, you get the impression that its epicenter happens to be perhaps the Middle East. But that Bharat proved to be a fantastic, fertile ground for this particular, let's say, mentality is rarely known and discussed, despite at least 6 or 7 seminal books being written on this particular subject. In fact, R.C. Majumdar has written on this particular subject, but not in great detail. In the absence of this big picture, the Bharatiya mind, which is currently buried deep under 3 layers of coloniality, European, Middle Eastern, and Nehruvian Marxist stroke post-colonial, will continue to consume popular, comforting, and infantile fictions. One such fiction is the existence of a Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, the much-touted composite cultural creature that is the supposed product of a syncretic relationship between Hinduism and Islam, creating the so-called unique Indian Islam. To precisely overcome these perception barriers, so that facts finally have a chance to breathe and shape the truth, I will touch upon the circumstances which led to the rise of pan-Islamic movements in Bharat. While there is a larger and troubled history of Islam in Bharat which warrants examination, I have chosen to focus on the most proximal cause of the rise of such movements, which is the decline of the Mughal Empire, which had a direct bearing on the partition of Bharat, so as to assess the latter's impact, if any, on the making of independent Bharat's constitution. So I'll just read 2 portions on the basics of this Wahhabi movement and directly go to the last chapter, which speaks of some of the riots. The fall of the Mughal Empire and the rise of pan-Islamic movements in Bharat. So this is one subsection in chapter 1. The disintegration of the Mughal Empire, which began under Aurangzeb, largely due to his disastrous campaign in the Deccan, which is also known as the graveyard of the Mughal Empire against the Marathas, and his murderous crusade against the Sikh gurus, was expedited after his death, thereby loosening the grip of Islam over Bharat significantly. The clearest sign of the terminal decline of Mughal Empire was its balkanization through the establishment of the Asafjahi dynasty, which is known as the Nizam of Hyderabad, in 1713, the Awadh dynasty in 1723, and the Bengal dynasty in 1740. To add to it, Nadir Shah's sack of Delhi in 1739 had rendered the Mughal Empire hollow and exposed its own decrepitude. In less than 200 years of Babur's victory in the First Battle of Panipat in 1526, Mughal influence was largely limited to Delhi alone as a result of the growing power of the Marathas, the Jats, the Sikhs, and the English. The battles of Plassey and Buxar in 1757 and 1764 in particular established the English as an aspiring contender for religio-political supremacy over Bharat. It was around then that the Ottoman Empire too saw general decline with its inability to keep pace with the Germanic and Russian empires. Now please make note of this, is very crucial. The simultaneous decline of 2 avowedly Islamic empires was a cause for concern among Muslim intellectuals of the time. This churn threw up 2 individuals of consequence. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab from 1703 to 1792 in Central Arabia, and Shah Waliullah Dehlavi from 1703 to 1762 in Bharat, both of whom attributed the decline of their respective Muslim empires to the corrosion of their religious social foundations. Therefore, according to them, Islam was due for a reformation, which meant going back to its pristine form without the heresies and the deviances that had crept into its practice by virtue of its contact with the infidels. Where Christian Reformation meant going back to the basics by undoing the Catholic Church's monopoly over the true faith, Islamic Reformation meant recreating Islam, also the true faith, as it existed during the Islamic Prophet's life and time. So, Reformation in Islam has typically meant the practice of the religion in the same manner as it was practiced around the life and time of its founder. So much so, its Indian successors chose to eat locusts because that was eaten by Arabs. So from dietary habits to dressing to linguistic habits, everything was meant to be reformed to mirror it to what was followed in the Middle East. According to Qiyamuddin Ahmad, Wahhabis are not essentially different from the rest of Muslims. However, they place greater emphasis on the following aspects, and here I quote Ahmad. Monotheism is the first aspect of Wahhabism. God is self-existent and the creator of all beings. He is unequaled in his attributes. Spiritual eminence and salvation consist in strict adherence to the commands of God as given in the Quran and laid down in the Shariat, and not in developing mystical feelings of communion. Which means there is no room for Sufi Islam in Wahhabism, because there is no element of mysticism permitted. So when we start celebrating Sufi Islam, how it was rejected by the mainstream of the community needs to be understood. Because we seem to be wallowing under the impression that there is some kind of a middle path that is possible, which makes coexistence possible or peaceful coexistence possible. Now, I don't know whether it is possible in the future. I'm merely saying the past is speaking otherwise. Ijtihad is the second aspect of the Wahhabi belief. The Wahhabis admit the right of interpretation of the Quran and Hadith as given to the Muslims and stress the desirability of exercising this right. Intercession. The Wahhabis do not believe in the theory of intercession or prayer on another's behalf by intermediaries. Passive belief in the principles of Islam is decidedly insufficient. You can't just say that I believe in it, you need to practice it. Innovation. Wahhabis condemn and oppose many of the existing religious and social practices for which there is no precedent or justification in the Shariat, which is to say, no practice which has any basis in the Shariat can be treated as Islamic under any circumstances. Prominent among these are tomb worship, so you can't have mazars, exaggerated veneration of peers, excessive dowries in marriages, the general show of pomp on festive occasions such as circumcision and milad, and prohibition of widow remarriages, which is to say, there is no room for any kind of joyous celebration at all as part of this particular belief system. No expression of happiness and no expression of music. No wonder you see guitars being burnt, you see, let's say, musical instruments being destroyed by the Taliban. This is where the mentality effectively comes from. When these four salient features are read together, especially in view of the prohibition on innovation, it becomes clear that the room for ijtihad, which is to say interpretation of Quran, is limited since it permits only the Quran and the Hadith, as opposed to later legal treatises on Islam, to be treated as authorities, so that life in contemporary times may be lived as close as possible to the lives of the earliest followers of Islam. This, as stated earlier, is to preserve the purity of an Islamic life. This is the ultimate goal. Now, let me just read out some portions on what this gentleman Shah Waliullah Dehlavi wrote to Abdali, inviting him to invade Bharat, which resulted in the Battle of Panipat. Because in that debate with Mr. Owaisi, he effectively said, Fatwa-e-Alamgiri was written in Bharat, therefore it must be treated as a Bharatiya document. His statement was, अरे इसको तो यहाँ पे लिखा गया है, तो अब इसको भारतीय कैसे नहीं मानेंगे? Which is why I had to push him to ask, इसका जड़ क्या है, नींव क्या है, भारत के हैं या बाहर के हैं? That is why I had to ask that basic question. Now, I will read out portions of this particular scholar, who is the forefather of Deoband, Ahle Quran, Ahle Hadith, all the movements in Bharat since the 1700s. He was practically a third or a fourth generation settler in Bharat. But did he see himself as an Indian or a Bharatiya? Let me just read out from his own words. I hail from a foreign country. My forebears came to India as emigrants. I am proud of my Arab origin and my knowledge of Arabic. For both of these bring a person closer to the Sayyid of the ancients and the moderns, the most excellent of the prophets sent by God and the pride of the whole creation. In gratitude for this great favor, I ought to conform to the habits and customs of the early Arabs and the Prophet himself as much as I can, and to abstain from the customs of the Turks and the habits of the Indians. Clearly, birth in Bharat alone does not make someone Bharatiya, since more than race or ethnicity, it is the consciousness of being Bharatiya that matters. As long as the consciousness refuses to embrace the Indic element, it remains alien, notwithstanding claims of accrual of nativity by birth. This is my response to Mr. Owaisi. Dehlavi's commitment to Middle Eastern consciousness is clear from his will, in which he called upon his heirs and his successors to give up the customs of pre-Islamic Arabs, and the Hunud, which of course was a reference to Hindus. One of the things that is common to pre-Abrahamic religions across the world is the worship of ancestors, Pitra. No wonder you perform the Pitra Paksh, the Shraddh, during that particular period. This is common across the world. From Latin America to Japan, this is common to all non-Christian, non-Muslim cultures. Imagine being pushed into a particular system that is asking you to disrespect your ancestors because they do not come from a particular faith, and brands your entire past as an age of jahiliyyah or ignorance. That is the fundamental distinction between your way of life and the Abrahamic way of life, which effectively says, sever your roots with all your ancestors. That is to say, pitron ko chhod hi do puri tarah se. And that's how the hit reset button is set in the minds of people's minds, which is to say, now it's a clean slate and I will write on it. That is the consequence of moving outside the indigenous fold and going to a different fold whose fundamental way of life and approach to everything under the sun is so at loggerheads with everything that you believe in. So, Dehlavi lived at a point of time when the Mughal Empire was looking at the worst of kings possible. In fact, they ended up calling their kings Rangila because of their colorful pursuits. This was not at the time of, let's say, Aurangzeb or Akbar. You're looking at a much later period. And so Dehlavi was desperately trying to tell them, Deen ke hisab se jiyo. Now let us see what he writes to one of the kings. O kings, Malala, which is, let's say, Islamic belief, urges you to draw your swords and not put them back in their sheaths again until Allah has separated the Muslims from the polytheists and the rebellious kafirs, and the sinners are made absolutely feeble and helpless. This is what he says. I'm not doing an Anand Ranganathan here. All I'm saying is, this is the literature which exists in public domain, which ought to have found its way into your textbooks. Now, why did the Battle of Panipat effectively take place? Because he was hoping that the Mughal Empire or its emperors would find the spine and the will to again live life in accordance with the template of Aurangzeb. You see, reformation was not needed at the time of Aurangzeb because he was already living the perfect life according to them. Now, what that perfect life has translated to for others, you decide. So, subsequent rulers were being exhorted to live that life because Aurangzeb was the wali, the role model. And since they were not living in accordance with that particular template, the philosophy under this particular mindset is depose the king if he does not live in accordance with the deen. And therefore, he wrote to 3 or 4 people inviting them to depose the Mughal emperor. One was Ahmad Shah Abdali, the second was the Nizam of Hyderabad, the third was the Emir of Afghanistan. The only person who came was, of course, Abdali. Abdali may or may not have come to, let's say, revive the flag of Islam. But the one thing that clearly shows, at least the document shows, is that he was invited to invade Bharat by this particular gentleman precisely because of the growing power of the Marathas and the Jats. And he also asked this Rohila Pathan, Najib-ud-Dawla, to help Abdali conquer this particular place. So after the Mughal emperor was deposed, Najib-ud-Dawla was made the regent for about 7 to 8 years. The point I'm trying to make is, if you believe that this is your home, you wouldn't ask an outsider to invade the place. But if you see this as a place of conquest, as a territory of conquest, then you have no roots whatsoever that tie you to this particular place. So you're very, very comfortable inviting anyone to invade this particular place. This is broadly the tone and tenor of chapters 1 to 8. And the final chapter, chapter 9, effectively covers the riots, not the riots, I wouldn't call them riots, genocides of Malabar, Gulbarga, Kohat, and Mopla. So let me read out some portions from the final chapter on the manner in which the Mopla genocide was carried out, rather the Hindu genocide by Moplas was carried out. And you can ask yourself if this can be treated as a peasant rebellion against landholders. Thus far, I've used the generic word riots in the context of the disturbance witnessed in the Malabar in 1921-22. Perhaps the more accurate term, which has been used in British records, would be outrage, given the sheer ferocity and one-sided barbarity of the episode. Accordingly, I shall use the word outrage for the remainder of this particular discussion. The reason why this particular discussion becomes relevant is yesterday, at a station in Kerala, a fresco or a painting of the so-called Mopla rebellion has been put out. It's been 101 years since that ghastly episode. And as opposed to people drawing the right lessons, the perpetrators of that particular genocide are being valorized as heroes and as anti-colonial, let's say, martyrs, as opposed to asking certain hard questions as to what was the treatment of Hindus. The Mopla outrage of 1921-22 was not an aberration. In view of the near unbroken violent communal history of the place, which dates back at the very least to Tipu Sultan's invasion of the Malabar and earlier by his father Hyder Ali, it would be factually incorrect to pin the blame for the entire outrage on the Khilafat movement and agitation. Which is to say, even independent of Khilafat, there was a history of communal violence. The Khilafat effectively provided people a fantastic window of opportunity to settle scores because it normalized Islamism. At best, the Khilafat agitation provided an opportunity or facade that enabled yet another round of ethnic cleansing of the Hindus of the region, this time the difference being only in scale and brutality, and the fact that the atrocities were chronicled in multiple sources, making denial of the occurrence impossible. It is for this reason that secular approach to history in Bharat is, what cannot be denied must be justified. This explains the typically Marxist treatment of the Hindu genocide in Malabar as a rebellion by Mopla peasants against the British establishment and Hindu landlords. In chapter 1, if one might recall, it was pointed out that a similar Marxist trope was employed to justify the anti-Hindu campaign of the Wahhabi Titu Mir in Barasat in Bengal to call it the Barasat Uprising of 1831. Terms like rebellion and uprising do not change facts that speak for themselves. Now ask yourself if a similar template has been used in the context of Kashmir. Pandits were rich people with a lot of land and resources at their disposal. There was a lot of angst against them as far as the rest of the community was concerned. And therefore, what was done was justified, and it was merely the release of pressure built over generations, which is purely economic in nature and has got nothing to do with religion. So in Mopla, you have the same rebellion template, which is landlord versus peasants. In Bengal, a similar template was employed. In Kashmir, the same template was employed. So therefore, we are being told that across history, with respect to each of these recorded instances, you should not look at religion as a causal factor whatsoever. And that you should trace all of this only to economic disparity and power imbalance. This is the textbook framework of the Marxist, where all he is looking for is class war. He doesn't want to explore any other reasons. Since a detailed examination of the history of the region, this is not needed. I'll just show you one paragraph and I'll open this up for questions. So I'll read out, let's say, just one excerpt which shows the involvement of some of the leading figures here. Yeah. On the devastation that followed at the hands of Moplas, here's an excerpt from Gopalan Nayar's account. The storm had burst with a vengeance. Civil administration came to a standstill. The sub-treasuries in the rebellion area were looted and lakhs of rupees carried away. Public buildings and records were burnt. Munsifs, magistrates and police officers had to seek refuge elsewhere. Police officials were overwhelmed by rebel hordes and had to surrender their arms. Hindu village officials had left their villages, and eventually the train traffic stopped for a week between Shoranur and Calicut. Murders, dacoities, forced conversions, and outrages on Hindu women became the order of the day. Hindu refugees in thousands poured into Calicut, Palakkad, the Cochin state, and other places, wending their weary way over hills and through jungles for safety from the lust and savagery of the Moplas. On 21st of August, the troops returned to Calicut since the city was surrounded on 3 sides by the Moplas. Martial law was declared temporarily by the commanding officer in Calicut. On 22nd August, Ali Musliar declared himself the king of Tirurangadi, which was the epicenter. Reinforcements from Madras, Bangalore, and Colombo arrived by 25th of August. On 26th of August, there was another round of confrontation of these forces with a huge mob of Moplas, which resulted in 400 Moplas being killed. On 30th August, troops marched to the Kirkupalli Mosque, which was opposite the Mambram Mosque, as the Moplas had assembled in the former. However, the troops did not enter the mosque to avoid being accused of desecrating it and inflaming passions further. On the morning of 31st of August, both sides clashed when the Moplas opened fire. This left 24 Moplas dead, 38 surrendered, including the king Ali Musliar. Describing the atrocities committed on Hindus between 20th August and 31st of August by Ali Musliar and his followers, Gopalan Nayar says, please note that the Mopla genocide started in August 1921 and went on for 6 months. It took the British to control this, it took them 6 months to control this, and the number of people who were involved in this, can you guess the number of people? The number of, let's say, criminals who were involved in this? Close to 60,000 people involved. Close to 60,000 people were involved in this, and this is the cumulative number after surrenders, after convictions, accounting for deaths and everything. Has any textbook so far in your curriculum told you that this is the extent of the problem as far as the Mopla genocide is concerned? Let me just read this out. With the capture of Ali Musliar on 31st of August ends the first act of the drama. During these 10 days, 20th to 31st, Hindu Malabar lay helpless at the feet of the Mopla rebels. It was a tale of woe to every Hindu family. It was destruction of every public building and of every temple. It was murder of Europeans whenever possible, and sufficient government forces were not available until the 28th to cope with the situation. The one bright light was the Pukatur battle, the effect of which was the salvation of the Ernaad Hindus. It had been arranged that on the 26th of August, a Friday, after the Jama prayer, all the Hindus in Manjari and the neighboring villages should be brought into the mosques and converted to the Muslim faith. Caps, dresses, and jackets were all ready for distribution among the converts, but the idea of wholesale conversion had to be given up in the consequence of another battle. The second phase of the outrage, which was at its peak, was from September to November 1921. During this phase, the battle between the troops and the Moplas was waged in the jungles and hills. Given the unfamiliarity of the terrain for the troops, the Moplas resorted to guerrilla tactics, and by 9th December 1921, Mopla surrenders were more frequent and in significant numbers. By December 1921, the chief Tangals, Tangal is the word in Malayalam for Sayyads. So when you refer to someone honorific in Urdu, what do you use? Aap. So Tangal is a paryayvachi or a synonym for Aap. So the Sayyads were referred to as Aap, not the other Aap, including Koya Tangal, who were instructing the Moplas, surrendered and so on. So on the extent of involvement of the Sayyads in the outrage, here is an extract from Nayar's book on the personal role of one particular Sayyad. Another Tangal or Sayyad who acquired notoriety was so-and-so. He held his court about midway between Tuvur and another place on the slope of a bare hillock with about 4,000 followers from the neighboring villages. More than 40 Hindus were taken to the Tangal with their hands tied behind their back, charged with the crime of helping the military by supplying them with milk and tender coconuts, and 38 of these Hindus were condemned to death. So here's how he supervised their execution. He superintended the work of murder in person and, seated on a rock near a well, witnessed his men cutting at the neck of his victims and pushing the bodies into the well. 38 men were murdered, one of whom was a pensioned head constable to whom he owed a grudge, had his head neatly divided into two halves. The Tangal surrendered at so-and-so, was tried by court-martial and ordered to be shot. Meanwhile, on 2nd November 1921, the Special Tribunal in Calicut found King Ali Musliar guilty of waging war against the King Emperor and sentenced him to death. Just a second. Although two bands of Moplas under Moiddin Kutti Haji and Konar Tangal still evaded capture by the 23rd of January 1922, 2,266 Moplas had been killed, 1,615 wounded, and 5,688 captured. There were also 38,256 surrenders. In other words, conservatively speaking, close to 48,000 Moplas were involved in the outrage of 1921. I leave it to the readers to understand the implications of such a large number for the Hindus of Malabar. By February 1922, most of the remaining leaders and their followers were either killed or captured. Now let's see some of the reactions to the Mopla riots. So one of the finest letters shaming Gandhi for contributing to this was written by Annie Besant in Young India. Both those letters have been reproduced in this. I don't think anybody has given a better tongue lashing to the gentleman than Annie Besant. So I'll just read out some portions of this. This is under the chapter Reactions in the Public Domain to the Mopla Outrage. The true nature and extent of depravity that the Hindus of Malabar were subjected to was captured in Annie Besant's stinging open letter to Gandhi titled Malabar's Agony in New India. Here are a few extracts from this letter dated 29th of November 1921. It would be well if Mr. Gandhi could be taken to Malabar to see with his own eyes the ghastly horrors which have been created by the preaching of himself and his loved brothers, Muhammad and Shaukat Ali. The Khilafat Raj is established there. On August 1st, 1921, sharp to the first date announced by Mr. Gandhi for the beginning of Swaraj and the vanishing of British rule, a police inspector was surrounded by Moplas revolting against that rule. From that date onwards, thousands of the forbidden war knives were secretly made and hidden away, and on August 20th, the rebellion broke out. Khilafat flags were hoisted on police stations and government offices. Strangely enough, it was on August 25th, 825 AD, that Chairman Perumal ascended the throne of Malabar, the first Zamorin, and from that day, the Malayalam era is still used as far as their calendar is concerned. The crowded refugees will only return to their devastated homes when they see those once more in safety in their ancestral places. Our correspondent has sent, just a second, I'll just show the relevant portion, I'm so sorry, yes. Mr. Gandhi was shocked when some Parsi ladies had their saris torn off, and very properly, yet the God-fearing hooligans had been taught that it was sinful to wear foreign cloth, and doubtless felt that they were doing a religious duty. Can he not feel a little sympathy for thousands of women left with only rags, driven from home, for little children of the flying mothers on roads in refugee camps? The misery is beyond description. Girl wives, pretty and sweet, with eyes half blind with weeping, distraught with terror. Women who have seen their husbands hacked to pieces before their eye, in the way Moplas consider as religious. Old women, tottering, whose faces became written with anguish, and who cry at a gentle touch and a kind look, waking out of a stupor of misery only to weep. Men who have lost all hope, crushed, desperate. I have walked among thousands of them in the refugee camps, and sometimes heavy eyes would lift as a cloth was laid gently on the bare shoulder. Eyes full of appeal, of agonized despair, of hopeless entreaty, of helpless anguish, thousands of them, camp after camp. I visited in Calicut 3 huge committee camps, 2 Christian and the Congress building and compound, where doles of rice are given daily for 7 a.m. to noon. At Palakkad, similar arrangements are made, and the order and care in feeding are good to see. Here's an extract from another piece in New India dated 6th of December 1921. Willful murders of Hindus and arson were first begun in my own place by Tangal and his lieutenant, another Tangal. You might have read accounts written by me in the Malabar Journal. The contagion began to spread like wildfire, and we began to hear of daily murders. Within a fortnight, cold-blooded murders of Hindus became very common. From within the borders of Calicut and Ernad, refugees come in large numbers with tales of murders and atrocities committed by the rebels. At Puttur, Ramsan and Ernad, only 12 miles northeast of Calicut, one day in broad daylight, 25 persons who refused to embrace Islam were butchered and put in a well. One out of these who narrowly escaped death got out of the well when the rebels left the place and ran to Calicut for his life. During the last weeks of numerous murders and forcible conversions came from another quarter also. This place is only 14 miles from Calicut. Every train to Calicut was carrying with it daily hundreds of refugees during the last week. If there were 10,000 refugees fed by the relief committee last week, it must have fed 15,000 this week. According to the statements given by them, there must be at least 50 murders and numerous cases of conversions and house burning. Can you conceive of a more ghastly and inhuman crime than the murders of babies and pregnant women? 2 days back, I had occasion to read a report given by a refugee in Calicut. A pregnant woman carrying 7 months was cut through the abdomen by a rebel, and she was seen lying dead on the way with the dead child projecting out of the womb. How horrible. Another, a baby of 6 months was snatched away from the breast of his own mother and cut into 2 pieces. How heartrending. Are these rebels human beings or monsters? From the same quarters, numerous forcible conversions were also reported. Now, I'll stop it here, lest I'm accused of reading out troublesome portions to titillate the audience into buying the book. I am trying to tell you that this was perhaps the most well-prepared, orchestrated genocide in Bharatiya history, and which was properly recorded by contemporary sources and multiple sources. My question is this: why do we continue to call this a rebellion? Why do we continue to call this some kind of a riot? The use of the word riot implies a parity of power on both sides, that there is a semblance of parity of power on both sides, there is some kind of a balance on both sides, there is a reaction, there is a counteraction. This was one-sided genocide. How can this be celebrated? A movie was about to be made on someone who wanted to call himself the king of the Khilafat, V.K. Haji, in the Kerala film industry. History textbooks were supposed to valorize these people, and they continue to. We are being told that Chhatrapati Shivaji should not be valorized for the simple reason that he has blood on his hands, when the fact of the matter is he was in a war. He was never accused of genocide. So you would want to equate a king who is in a war with people who have actually committed an orchestrated genocide. This is the imbalance of the discourse today. But I think a lot of people have already spoken on the imbalance of the discourse, on why the history textbooks don't say this, don't say that. I am saying throw the history textbook into the dustbin. These books are already saying what we're supposed to. My point is, now that you have the information with you, what do you propose to do with this? Now that you have been given facts, all these days the fantastic, let's say, sore point was, aaj tak to hame pata hi nahi tha. Okay, now the facts have been given. Ab kya kar loge? Kar kya loge? That is the question that's coming from the other side. Decide. Questions?
Thank you so much, sir, for familiarizing us with the excerpts of what is comprehensively mentioned in your book. I would now request Vikas and Rajat to come up on the stage for the moderation session. Thank you.
Am I audible? All right. So, almost an hour into the session. How's the Josh? He did not travel all the way to Delhi University just to hear this. Shall we try again? How's the Josh? How's the Josh? How's the Josh? Bharat. So, let's jump right into the questions. So, you have at several places in your book quoted Aisha Jalal and her work Partisans of Allah. So, in that work, she has tried to argue that the normal definition of jihad as a war against unbelievers is a misinterpretation of the clerics. So how far do you align with that position? What's your take on
here's
it?
what I have done. I have used let's say most of these sources primarily for factual references, not for opinion-based references. Because I don't think I would want to assume that I know better about Islam than Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, who's been celebrated by so many people. I don't want to believe that I know Islam better than the founders of Deoband. I'm sure they know better. I don't want to sit and operate under the belief or this delusion that an untrained opinion is more qualified to speak on behalf of a particular community than a trained scholar who's chosen to dedicate his entire life to the, let's say, to the practice of that particular faith, to the understanding of that particular faith. I don't want to do that. So that's one aspect of it. So therefore, whether it's Aisha Jalal or Barbara Metcalfe or any of these people who have relied upon in the book, I've used them for factual references. So if you take a look at the footnotes, where there is a fact, there is a footnote, by and large. But where there is an opinion, I am drawing my inferences based on the conduct and the material. Unless I'm saying, well, somebody else also agrees with me for so and so reasons. So that's the first level of the response. Second, let's apply the very same logic in the context of the Varnashrama system and the so-called caste system. Assume for a moment someone wants to tell you that this is not the manner in which the system was created in the first place. This is not the manner in which the system was intended to operate in the first place. आप जितना भी लॉजिक या तर्क खड़ा करने की कोशिश कीजिए, लेकिन आपके सामने सिर्फ पहले फैक्ट आएगा. So you're bound to ask yourself, no matter what you say, does the reality on the ground meet your explanation? Your only argument can be, the reality on the ground has moved far away from its original intent. However, that argument cannot be applied in the context of jihad, because this has been the consistent implementation from the 8th century onwards at the very least. Anyone who is given an opinion to the contrary is an exception. And every time someone points out an exception, he is only strengthening the existence of the rule. Because that means एक कायदा है जिससे आप थोड़ा हटके जा रहे हैं, लेकिन अगर आप departure या digression की बात करेंगे, that means you're basically saying there is an average, there is a median, and there is a rule. So as far as I am concerned, I am not interested in doing a BKK exercise, बाल की खाल खींचना exercise, as far as jihad is concerned. I am going to look at it only from an effect point of view and an impact point of view, as a survivor of a community who has witnessed this and experienced this for generations together. Now I would like to see कितने फतवे ऐसे जारी हुए हैं and कितने लोग ऐसे फतवों को मानते हैं और उस पे अमल करते हैं. So you have this gentleman Mehdi Hasan in his so-called Oxford debate who constantly spoke of how many fatwas were issued by others, condemning this attack, condemning that attack. The point is, which of the two fatwas seems to carry more weight and application among the members of the community? Will the non-compliance of one particular fatwa have more impact than the other or more repercussions than the other? That's the only question. जिस फतवे से आपको डर नहीं है उस फतवे का रहना या ना रहना कोई, doesn't make a difference to me. So I'm not interested in, let's say this remote interpretation or obscurantist interpretation. At every point of time, almost in every century, the interpretation as well as the application, namely the thought as well as the deed with respect to jihad, has been violent in nature. And therefore, in the interest of self-preservation, as an individual as well as a community, I have the right to assume that I'm sorry, I will go with the worst case scenario because I need to prepare for it, as opposed to drawing comfort from the other interpretation, which is peaceful. Next.
Thank you, sir. Brilliant.
Namaste, sir. Sir, I read both of your books very thoroughly and I was able to obliterate my colonial consciousness. Thank you for that. Sir, in your second book, you wrote that the impact of Western education on the Hindus as well as the Muslims was quite different. The Hindus got more detached from their culture and they got taken up in this English elite environment, taking up positions in the colonial administration, and became what Thomas Macaulay called as Indians in color and blood, but English in tastes, opinions, and intellect. While on the other side, Muslims, they retreated back to their traditional Islamic practices. Sir, what explains this different approaches or different responses to the European coloniality?
So there are two ways of looking at it, or rather two examples. The way Hindus look at Raja Ram Mohan Roy is the way Muslims look at Syed Ahmad Ali Khan of Aligarh. Okay. Now, Syed Ahmad Khan's entire goal was to learn English and to expose his community to Muslim education so that they could become part of state power without giving up their origins. Remember, Syed Ahmad Khan was a self-confessed Wahhabi himself because he's a product of the Dehlavi school of thought. He is actually a student of the very same seminary. I've explained this in the book. So his entire approach was, सीखो, उसमें डूब मत जाओ, क्योंकि तुम्हें इस सिस्टम को वापस लेना है. Whereas Hindus, if you look at Ambika Charan Majumdar's book, which I've cited, he was, I think, the president of the Congress around the 1915-16. This gentleman's book on the evolution of Indian political movement is a go-to reference. And he opens the book by a deification of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Raja Ram Mohan Roy effectively believed that everything that was of consequence to Hindus from an education perspective was of no consequence, and that the only way that they could uplift themselves was by exposing themselves to Western education. So the clear distinction is, one chooses to learn Western education only to be able to navigate that particular system so that he can take back that particular system. And the other embraces Western education because he believes that his own culture has no value and his own educational systems has no value, and therefore in order for him to be at par with everybody else in the rest of the world, he needs to give up his past and adopt Western education, which explains even his reconception of Hinduism on Christian lines. The way he saw the Brahmo system or whatever it is was primarily through a Christian framework. So the difference between the Hindu approach and the Muslim approach is, the Muslim approach has been to keep its traditional systems alive, either through its seminaries, and even the most vocal of its reformists constantly spoke of keeping both identities alive and giving primacy to Islamic identity first. If Jinnah considered Aligarh Muslim University as the Muslim arsenal of Bharat, which would lead to the creation of Pakistan, and if he thought Aligarh was actually a great benchmark, Jamia was established because they believed that Aligarh itself was pro-British. imagine an institution which you associate with the Pakistan movement being seen as more pro-British, and as a consequence, Jamia is set up. Therefore, there is a very clear strain of conservatism as far as the Muslim thought is concerned, which has kept its consciousness alive and its collective memory alive for generations together. Here, Tilak was branded orthodox, and he was effectively called a Brahmin fascist by his own contemporaries. When the man singularly understood that the only way that you can actually fight the other side is by getting into the system without giving up your roots. Ultimately, the Swaraj Party was set up only on these lines. That's my answer to the question.
Thank you, sir.
So, in response to what you said, the Hindu society or the Hindu community responded to English education in the way it did because I think it was already colonialized, right? It had already been subjugated psychologically and culturally. So, what do you have to say about that? Like the Middle Eastern coloniality, it is still present. In 1946, B.R. Ambedkar published this book in before partition.
Pakistan partition, India, right?
Actually make a case for partition. So in that book, probably on the page 46 or 7, he has said that there are only two ways in which the minority problem of India can be. The first one is to partition India and transfer population. And the second one is by subjugating the same way as Muslims or British did with the Hindus, to subjugate Muslims culturally and psychologically and to render them devoid of their sense of separate identity. Is there a third way? Is there a third alternative? Because I think the second one is too implausible and the first one has already been tried and actually goes against the Sanatan principles.
Right. So the first solution, we are now looking at the implementation of the first solution after 75 years. Do you think it's been a success? No. Okay. So the partition of this country, in the hope that we would be able to live in peace, has proved to be an utter failure. Now, because even that solution was not implemented in the manner that he wanted to, right? Which is the population exchange. The second thing is, it goes back to the root concept. Agar ye aapki punya bhumi hai, then the question of partition can never be on the table. That's one. You are not fighting for the Himalayas exclusively for geonational security or water security or whatever it is. Himalayas are the spiritual epicenter for Sanatana Dharma. And when you have already given Sindh, you have already given those portions which are associated with the Vedic period. Gradually, those territories which are associated with your, let's say, history are being colonized from both sides. Which means effectively tomorrow you will read of these, let's say, these landscapes only as part of your mantras or as part of your practice, but in reality it's out of your hand. So a few days ago when I was talking to someone who was fairly senior and who understands how these things work, the gradual attempt has been to completely colonize northern parts of Bharat, especially the Punjab region and the Himalayan region, so that your Hindu identity is completely eviscerated. Imagine someone going to the Kailash Mansarovar and planting the red flag of the communist. For me, that's harakiri, that's sacrilege, that's blasphemy out and out. That's exactly what is happening. 2, therefore, is the first solution the better solution? Well, the first solution could have worked if those voices which were asking for Hindu unity and Hindu assertion had been given a chance. They were branded the extremists, they were branded the let's say the revolutionaries, and they were marginalized completely. I've said this in a previous discussion, and in the book I've clearly pointed out that while the revolutionaries continued to carry on the battle against the British through their own resources, the society did not come forward to help them either with money or anything else, because they were not seen as the mainstream option. So if you were to ask me whether the Hindu society was already colonialized, it is my view that the minute of 1835, which led to the introduction of the English education, And the formation of the Congress party, or let's say the Congress as a platform in 1885, marked the most significant milestones of taking away the Kshatriya and the revolutionary spirit of Hindus. Because both of them were meant to first kill you culturally and then to take away your political independence. As a consequence, शास्त्र शास्त्र से ही आता है, और आपने एक बार शास्त्र को रिप्लेस कर दिया तो शस्त्र पकड़ने की जो हिम्मत है वो भी चली जाती है. When everybody wonders how do these people produce suicide bombers, he is still in touch with his roots. He is so confident of what he is doing, and he's been indoctrinated into it so much that you don't know if you have the ability to do any of these things. Forget even suicide bombers. I'm not even going on those lines. Do you have the ability to stop someone if he chooses to wield a knife right in front of you on religious lines on the streets? Your first, let's say, resort will be to run away from the place. When you say that Hindus were already colonialized, you have to realize one thing. The British took power from whom? The Marathas. After the Third Anglo-Maratha War of 1818, which was fought for Delhi. Plassey and Buxar were very small parts of the Bengal province at that point. The battles of, let's say, Plassey and Buxar did not immediately project them as an all-India power. They were still a small power because the Marathas were still great. Even after the 1761 war, they continued to have a lot of, let's say, territory under their control, thanks to who? Mahadji Scindia. The man single-handedly restored the Maratha glory. So considering that, I would believe that they went about it in a slightly smart fashion, which is after the defeat of the Marathas, the introduction of education within a period of 1817 to 1835 is less than 20 years, education was introduced. And allow me to say this, something that I'm bound to be hated for, is that the success of the British man was in the co-option of the elites of the Hindu society fully. It is the elites of the Hindu society who learnt English first, who gave up their traditional professions. And consequently, you gave the other side an opportunity to divide you from the rest of your community. And since you chose to associate yourself with the British identity, obviously you have also given the missionaries an opportunity to start harvesting souls from the rest of the communities. In stark contrast, the religious elites of the Muslims continued to be associated with their traditional institutions. That's why I constantly trace the trajectory of the Sayyids on the one hand in the Muslim community, the Brahmins and Kshatriyas of the Hindus on the other community. Now I'm bound to be accused of, let's say, anti-Brahmin bigotry. Sorry, this is not bigotry, this is a statement of fact. Because one of the reasons that the Muslim establishment was outside the scope of the British establishment was because of a conscious decision taken कि हम अंग्रेजी नहीं सीखेंगे and we will follow a policy of remaining aloof from the colonial establishment. The first major change to that came from Syed Amir Ali in Bengal, then followed by Syed Ahmad Khan. Even then they decided that we will give primacy to both forms of education and the goal will be to reclaim Muslim state power. I would like to see which article or constitution of the debate of the Congress effectively said that the goal of the Congress is to reclaim the Maratha state power or the Hindu state power. They never said this. Every time Lala Lajpat Rai or Aurobindo Ghosh were exhorting them to focus on Hindu unity, or even Tilak would say this, their statement was, हम हिंदू पार्टी नहीं है, हम सेक्युलर पार्टी हैं. आज के डेट में ये कौन कह रहा है, आप सोच लीजिए.
Sir, although it might seem contradictory in visualization, yet it is a fact that Indic culture has an infinite capacity to accommodate all kinds of ideologies, belief systems and religions, which might be antagonistic to many others who are particularly accustomed to a monoculture. So my question is the role of the state in this reclaiming of the civilizational ethos. So in the contemporary scenario, how enthusiastic or inclined is the state in pursuing this decolonial approach towards history, towards constitutionality or reform? And if at all it is undertaking some cultural renaissance, why it is being termed as being essentially nationalistic or hyper-nationalistic. And sir, whether fundamentally it is the duty of the state to reawaken or the society to do that. That's all.
See, as far as your question is concerned, perhaps there is a tendency that I would want to discourage. Stop asking the question, why are we being branded fascist, nationalist, hyper-nationalist? इस सवाल का कोई मतलब नहीं रहा. It is very clear that there is a very specific agenda behind imposing these labels, which is to shame you and to guilt you from reclaiming your roots. You should simply develop a thick skin, which is to say, I don't care for public opinion at this point of time, or the so-called opinion of elites at this point, because they don't represent the public opinion. They represent the opinion of a particular group, or a particular gang, or a particular group of wine-tasting liberals, which I don't care for. Your focus should be slightly different. Your focus should be on building your positive narrative in terms of what you represent. अगर आज आपसे कोई सवाल करता है that if धार्मिक रिपब्लिक 2.0 were to be recrafted, ये दिखेगा कैसे? इस प्रश्न का आपके पास उत्तर है? We don't have. What would be the scope of fundamental rights in this constitution? What would be the scope of gender rights in this particular constitution? सबसे बड़ा डर इनका ये अभी इन्होंने बिठा दिया है कि अगर आप धार्मिक रिपब्लिक फिर से आएगा तो वर्णाश्रम धर्म फिर से आएगा. इसका मतलब दिल से जाति प्रथा फिर से आएगी. How do you respond to this? This or these are the kind of questions that you should be focusing on. Now in that, you cannot expect the state to be fully invested and as invested as you, because the state is a political entity. Therefore its considerations are bound to be power oriented. The society's interest is bound to be more civilization oriented and survival oriented. So the lead must be taken by the society, which is why I've given this particular, let's say, movement as an example, that after the loss of Muslim state power represented by the Mughals, how the entire Muslim community chose to organize itself, led by its religious elites, to come out with at least 7 movements which entrenched the Islamic identity further and finally led to the creation of Pakistan. Pakistan was not created because the Muslim League was found. Muslim League was found because the society had already started moving in that particular direction, and then which ultimately led to the creation of Pakistan. So therefore, you have to start thinking of what is the root cause analysis. The root cause analysis always starts with the society. So a few days ago, someone said, can we immediately go about changing the constitution? I said, it's not a question of whether there's a legal barrier in changing the constitution. You have a huge perceptual and societal barrier in changing the constitution, because except for this group, how many in your own peers and in your own circles would you be able to convince that this constitution is needed for so and so reasons? You can leave the Muslims and Christians out of this particular discussion. Hindus के अंदर अगर आपने ये प्रश्न छेड़ दिया, कितने लोग इस पे सीधा जवाब देने के लिए तैयार होंगे? That is the difference. And therefore, if at all there are any takeaways that I would want people to walk with after they read the book, is political power and state power का होना जरूरी है, but it is merely a sadhan or a madhyam to a particular goal. And उस goal या उस destination का identification करेगा समाज. And that is only going to happen when you keep your institutions alive. And therefore your temples, your mathas, and every institution that keeps the societal identity alive gives you a sense of community. These are the institutions that effectively, let's say, translate to longevity in a collective memory, in civilizational memory. In Muslim League's conferences, the venue would be chosen based on specific Islamic invasions. Sindh was chosen for a specific reason, and they would start with a recital of Bin Qasim and say how a young teenager came and destroyed the Kafirs here. If he can do that, imagine how much 70 million Muslims can do. That's exactly their exhortation. Every time. Okay, simple example. Whether in Delhi or in other places, the Muslim League's conference would start with a recitation of verses from the Quran. Okay? Congress के history में ये कभी नहीं हुआ. कभी नहीं हुआ. It will start with a Jai Jaikar for the king or the queen and end with a Jai Jaikar for the king and the queen. If this is your origin, in terms of your so-called independence movement, fundamentally the Congress must be held responsible for altering the DNA of the society in a very negative way. एंड कांग्रेस एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन नहीं है, पाकिस्तान की तरह ये भी एक सोच है, विच मूव्स लाइक अ स्पिरिट फ्रॉम बॉडी टू बॉडी. तो कल कांग्रेस का रोल कोई और निभाएगा, आज कांग्रेस का रोल कोई और निभाएगा. You will see that as far as the movement is concerned, from 1905 onwards, जो पहले एक्सट्रीमिस्ट और नेशनलिस्ट थे, पावर में आते आते लिबरल्स बन गए, सेक्युलर बन गए. एंड मैं 1920 की बात कर रहा हूं. They moved. और जो चिल्ला रहे थे, अरे भाई आपने अपने जितने भी आदर्शों को छोड़ दिया है, चुप रहो, ये बहुत इनकन्वीनियंट सवाल है, चुप रहो तुम प्लीज, ये ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की बात है, पार्टी लॉयल्टी की बात है, चुप रहो तुम. और उनको दरकिनार कर दिया गया. सो व्हेन यू इफेक्टिवली साइडलाइन वॉइसेस व्हिच आर स्पीकिंग फॉर द सिविलाइजेशन, एंड दिस सीम्स टू बी अ ट्रेंड एटलीस्ट फॉर मोर देन अ सेंचुरी नाउ. गांधी को ब्लेम करके कोई फायदा नहीं है. ये डीएनए जो है कांग्रेस का गांधी के बहुत पहले से था. Gandhi entered the fray only in 1916-17, not before that, not too much. He was until then he was in South Africa. People said अच्छा लिखता है, अच्छा बोलता है, बस that's all. उससे ज़्यादा उसको कोई भाव नहीं देता था. Nobody used to actually say, अच्छा, you come here, shout for South African Indians every once in a while and go back. That's it. This was the DNA much before him. खिलाफत के जितने भी resolutions release हुए थे before Gandhi became a force to reckon with in the Congress, you should read who were the ones to pass those resolutions. Gandhi can be blamed for giving a multiplier effect and for mainstreaming a particular thought, but the genesis did not start from him. Next.
So, just you mentioned about Gandhi. I guess very less people have noticed here that your picture is directly face to face to the man on the wall.
At the very least, we are at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Polar opposites. I have certain, let's say, points of view which overlap with his, but I don't need to draw inspiration from his opinions. I'd rather go back to Sri Aurobindo. I'd rather go back to Swami Vivekananda. I might even go back to Tilak. I'll go back to Lala Lajpat Rai, Bipin Chandrapal. On any of the issues where I find myself similar to Gandhi, I immediately say, कोई और example जल्दी दे दो. नहीं चाहिए. Because you see, at the end of the day, it's not a question of the position that a person holds on individual points of view. आपकी legacy किस चीज से जानी जाती है? What do people remember you for? I'm not sure people are going to remember him for, let's say, the kind of things that he said on Hindu Dharma against the West and all that. That's a different issue altogether. But finally, आपने रघुपति राजा उसको भी आपने बदल दिया. You changed even that. Everything was changed. हिंदी को हिंदुस्तानी कर दिया. शुद्ध हिंदी का कोई मतलब नामो निशान नहीं रहा. I am saying this as a man from the south. Why would I want corruption of this language further by an indigenous person? I don't. Other side is clearly fighting for Urdu on the basis that we don't want Sanskrit influences in Urdu. Why should I tolerate an Urdu influence in Hindi, bhai? So, a slight stinger and a pot shot at people who speak Hindi as the native language. Don't go about asking others to speak in Hindi before you ask yourself whether what you speak is actually Hindi. At the very least, you start doing that. Anybody who tries to, let's say, insert other words in Tamil would get a proper response. Saying not done, not permissible. We will find the appropriate word for a computer also in Tamil. In our newspapers, we don't transliterate. News को news बोल दिया लेकिन देवनागरी में बोल दिया. Computer को computer बोल दिया लेकिन देवनागरी में बोल दिया. इसको हिंदी थोड़ी बोलेंगे आप. That's the difference. So my suggestion would be, people will say, oh, he's asking for puritanism. The other side is very clear that they want purity of their way of life, their way of language. I'm merely saying, why are you being, let's say, such a wimp in asking for your positions? Next.
Come on, cheers.
Questions from the audience. If you have any further questions, not to stop you, I'm just saying that I think perhaps you're running out of time. I'm sure the audience may have a couple of questions to ask.
Alright, sir. Before I pass the battle to audience, just one last question.
Yeah, sure, please.
what is your message to the students of GU? What can we do to bring about the change that is
Thank you. I
required?
think that's a very important question. My suggestion is this. They'll say, Buddha aa gaya nasihat dene. So, I'll do my best to keep this as relevant as possible. I am 37. I turn 37 this November. So, I'm not that far apart from you. I'm certainly not in the same league as your parents. So, I'm saying something, please take it with a pinch of salt and also take it with some degree of seriousness. Since you have shown the seriousness to come and suffer my lecture, I'm assuming I am entitled to tell you a few things. One, this is the best possible demographic window that Bharat has after several centuries where a lot of things are coming together. Youth demographic, the explosion of social media, which means that you have the power to disseminate your opinions. Alternate sources of information, which means that you're no more dependent on mainstream media. You have access to such fantastic literature produced by people who are presenting facts before you, which renders your textbooks useless. Plus, you're seeing a global movement of a similar churning going on in multiple places. It can't get better than this. My only hope is that try and use social media to spread awareness and for implementation of certain initiatives. If I were you, what I would do is this. Maybe have some kind of a student congress not in that sense, a student body, where you have a follow-up of resolutions of actions. Which is to say, you may have multiple bodies doing the same thing each time from scratch. That means each time you're reinventing the wheel without there being a continuity of thought. The message of the book is organization and collective effort. Find out ways in which you as students can collaborate with like-minded people across the board to put forth your point of view as clearly as possible through writing, through street plays and whatnot. But most importantly, one of the things that I have benefited from is that I have acquired skill sets which allow me to earn my independent livelihood and also be able to comment on these topics without being dependent on anyone. Now, therefore, as opposed to turning into activists, turn into subject matter experts. Subject के विशेषज्ञ बनिए किसी भी हालत में. And whether it's let's say people who are preparing for civil services or people who are aspiring to make a career in international relations and foreign affairs, have a very clear strategic sense of thought. The idea behind these initiatives is to give you some goals which you can work towards, and so that you can participate in it through your own skill sets. My invitation has not been to ask people to jump into law. That's not the point. Jump into a subject which you think you can be fantastic at, and through which you can serve the cause of the motherland. That would be my only broad message, nothing else. Because you have to realize this thing. You think that 2024 same dispensation continue hoga, 29 mein ye continue hoga. What is the point? The point is, these windows have to be used to actually deliver a lot of goods on the ground by creating fantastic literature. And can anybody guarantee here that the election results of 2024 will be on predictable lines? कौन guarantee दे सकता है? It's like asking a वकील, आप इस केस में हारोगे या जीतोगे? कोई ठीक से जवाब नहीं देगा. किसको पता? जज को पता है. We don't know. Similarly, don't be complacent based on the current scenario. कभी भी कुछ भी हो सकता है. अगर let's say people had lots of expectations from Bengal, look at how it turned out. Anything can happen at any time, because you never know when the demographic clout will be pressed into service on the street to prevent you from participating in elections. इसकी गारंटी आप दे सकते हैं? नहीं दे सकते हैं. आप दिल्ली में लोगों को बचा नहीं पा रहे हैं, कहाँ से बचाएंगे बाकियों को? इतने सारे राइट्स तो दिल्ली में हो गए. 3 बार तो हो चुका है ना, for multiple reasons. That means a certain degree of normalization has already happened. अब आप इसके आदी हो चुके हैं. The testing of the state apparatus response mechanism to the riot has been done, and the response is इससे कुछ नहीं होगा, हिम्मत नहीं है इसमें. That message has gone loud and clear. So no, therefore you have these random activities, lone wolf activities. So my point is, don't take the present state of affairs as, let's say, as an indication of the things to come. I would simply say the present is a blessing, make use of it and push the cause as much as possible through your individual and collective efforts. In which case, my only exhortation is, you may not have enough time to waste. Consider that. This is not a lone battle that any particular individual can fight. And no person should be doing it alone also. The magnitude of the problem is too big. We need multiple heads. We need more people. Assuming for a moment that before I walk into the car, somebody randomly chooses to come and hug me and in the process stabs me in the back. क्या कर लेंगे आप? क्या security दे पाएंगे आप मुझे? क्या कर लेंगे? Can you guarantee that from here to home I'll reach safely? You can't. State can't guarantee. Where will you guarantee? Right? I am not questioning, let's say, your preparation. I'm saying that is the nature of unpredictability. If that is the case, I would want more such voices. I would want more people to be on the field. असुरों से एक चीज सीखना जरूरी है. रक्तबीज राक्षस होना जरूरी है. एक मरा तो 10 को पैदा होना चाहिए. And even when it comes to standards of tapasya, for घोर tapasya they say asura tapasya. Because अड़ गया तो अड़ गया, किसी भी हालत में. So therefore, there is a lot to be learned from everyone. And I have learnt a lot through the process of this book from the other side. Whatever lessons need to be drawn in terms of never ever compromising on civilizational, let's say, imperatives. That clarity is brilliant. No way. So I'm hoping that we produce more hawks, more hardliners, more people who are willing to say, I am not going to budge from this particular position no matter what. I am not looking for wheelers, dealers, fixers, and collaborators. Thank you.
We are now open to the questions from audience. Are volunteers ready with the mics?
In the interest of giving everybody an opportunity, keep your questions short and crisp so that I'm able to engage with more people. Yes, Rajasthani guy, go on. जी आ रही है.
1947 में अखंडित भारत की 24% population wanted, fought and got one-fourth of Bharat.
जी.
Turned that into Muslim Bharat.
जी.
That is known as Pakistan.
जी.
8% ने यहाँ रहने तय किया, जो आज 16% है. CA protest में खिलाफत 2.0 को पुश कर दिया गया ऑलरेडी. हिंदू त्योहारों पर हिंदुओं के ऊपर 1920 की तरह अटैक्स हो रहे हैं. 1920 की तरह ये सर तन से जुदा वाली किलिंग्स आज हो रही हैं. हम माँ भारती के कब तक ऐसे टुकड़े काट काट के देते रहेंगे? What is the way forward and what is the solution?
जी. तो this ties into his previous question. अगर फिर से आज के डेट में उन स्थानों में जहाँ पे आपका डेमोग्राफिक बैलेंस वीक है, किसी ने कहा कि हमें ये काट के दे दो, और हमने फिर से उस पार्टीशन के सोल्यूशन को मान लिया, तो इट ओनली मीन्स एवरी 40 years और 50 years आप काट काट के देते रहेंगे. Which is why I said विभाजन is never the solution. Now hopefully as part of the third book, and I've said this publicly and now it has become final, it won't be a trilogy, it will be a quadrilogy, because the third book will cover the period. The third book will cover the period from 1925 to 46, and the fourth book will cover exclusively what happened in the Constituent Assembly debates 46 to 50. The reason is, 24 के शुरू होते होते ये रंगीला रसूल का event शुरू हो गया था, which led to 295A and everything. But that event ended only in 1929, with the murder of Mahashay Rajpal and others in the court and everything else. 1924 में ये हुआ था. I believe that we are currently living through that particular cycle now. Okay, exactly. So therefore the point is, I want to see what happened then. From 1908 or in fact 1912 onwards, the Sangathan movement had started, which led to the creation of the Hindu Mahasabha. Then by 1925 the Hindu Mahasabha splits, and then you have the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which was created on the Vijayadashmi of 1925. So all this happens. Now when all these organizations were coming about, at the same time the Congress was constantly ceding space over and over again. जवाब क्या जा रहा था इनकी तरफ से? I want to see what was the resistance being offered. Why were people treating Congress as the sole or at least the primary voice of Bharatiyas? इनको इतना दर्जा क्यों दिया गया था, उसका मैंने already इसमें indication दे रखा है. You have to realize that the British man was constantly propping up the Congress as the primary voice of the people because they were happy to collaborate with the British. And therefore he said, अगर कोई चर्चा करनी है या राउंड टेबल करना है या नेगोशिएशंस करना है, पहले तो ये बैठेंगे, उसके बाद बाकी सब बैठेंगे. He wanted the extremists out of the discussion table altogether. So a significant, let's say, credit for propping up the Congress as the primary voice of the Bharatiyas must go to the British man because it was convenient for him. Just as, let's say, the New York Times treats NDTV as the primary representation of Bharat today, or the Washington Post decides to choose, let's say, treat somebody else as the primary voice, because those voices which are convenient to your agenda will be given a certain degree of importance. That's what exactly was happening. But what were the revolutionaries and, let's say, the other organizations doing? That I want to read. Whatever we have read so far has been fairly superficial. At least my reading has been superficial. Let me not talk about others. So I want to see that. My solution, therefore, is if, let's say, some people decided that the Gandhian approach may not be the best way forward, would it have been possible to arrive at a different outcome if a non-Gandhian approach were to be employed? Okay, that's a question you have to ask yourself. एक तरफ आप छत्रपति शिवाजी को पूज रहे हैं और दूसरी तरफ आप गांधी को भी पूज रहे हैं, ये दोनों साथ में नहीं चल सकते हैं. Makes really no sense. I mean, I don't understand what kind of a confused mind that is. You must go through a positive state of cognitive dissonance that you have a multiple personality disorder. एक तरफ बोल रहा है ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरा नाम और दूसरा कह रहा है जय भवानी. कैसे हो सकता है? One is Jekyll and the other is Hyde. How is this working out? दो नावों पे पैर रख के चलना नामुमकिन है. It's impossible. Choose. And don't choose because you have to win the applause of an audience. Choose because your survival depends on it. It's now become a question of survival. If the spokesperson of a party in power doesn't seem to find herself in a safe place in this country, you're telling me that the rest of us are safe. Tell me, how does that work? No. And as far as I am concerned, these are reactions to the reactions to her statement, which was not a statement. Her statement itself was a reaction. Will determine the way forward. So look around you and ask yourself, इसको ये बोलना नहीं चाहिए था क्योंकि international relations बिगड़ गए. क्या international relations? कतार के साथ? I mean, what international relations, man? I don't understand. So you'll have WhatsApp forwards which say, चीन को भारत ने परास्त किया गलवान में और लेकिन simultaneously अब कतार के सामने झुक गए. Does it make sense? So this, according to me, has become the litmus test. For every institution, executive, judiciary, and the society, all our reactions are a reflection of what is the way forward or what is the way of the future. I am still not sure because I can see anger simmering in the society saying, why are we constantly under attack? When we are in power, we are under attack. When we are not in power, we are under attack. Majority हो तभी मरते हैं, minority हो तभी मरते हैं. कोई फर्क ही नहीं पड़ता है. ये सवाल ठीक से लोगों ने पूछना शुरू कर दिया है, especially after the incident in Karnataka, after Praveen Nettaru was killed. So I hope that this anger translates to stinging, uncomfortable questions to those who are meant to be answering these questions and who are meant to actually protect us. Uttar Pradesh in 2017 was won because of the Kairana incident. Because Hindus of Kairana were asked to leave the place. That charged the atmosphere completely. That changed the entire narrative. Thankfully so. But आज भी अभी लोग वहाँ पे मर रहे हैं. That's a different issue. But I would still say that happens to be one of the few states with such a huge population, around 23 crores and about 6 crores of a particular community, which has managed to, let's say, stem the tide of CA riots हो या protests हो, सभी चीज़ों के लिए वहाँ पे एक example आया है. I just want to see if the South manages to produce someone like a Raja Singh and gives him power. I genuinely want to see what is going to be the reaction of the South, because Sri Yogi cannot be everywhere, right? No, and I don't mean to say this in a facetious sense. I am saying हर जगह के लिए एक local हल चाहिए. When the problem is local, the solution also needs to be local. So I'm trying to ask myself what will happen to Sri Suvendu Adhikari in the future. I'd like to see what happens to Sri Raja Singh in the future. Lot of these people. So the hope is that we have multiple such voices which take responsibility for the protection of this civilization. And when that happens, you'll have the ideal situation that I'm waiting for. Competitive Hindutva. कौन हिंदुओं के लिए ज़्यादा करेगा? The day that becomes the reality of Bharatiya politics, that is the day I would say, अब मेरा गर्दन काट लो, काम हो गया. That's it. That is what we should all be hoping for. Competitive Hindutva where everybody is falling over each other for the majority vote in the first time in Bharat's history. That should happen. Next.
Please ask your question.
Good evening, sir. Sir, my question is to you. I usually watch the news channel of this country, and they usually targeting the one community of a particular religion or the region. Why does it so? And secondly, why they're targeting their culture, and why they're targeting the 21A of the article of the Constitution? Because this gives the right to protection of minorities. Could you elaborate on this and clear my doubts?
Article 21A was about right to education. Maybe I've read the
Yes, sir.
Constitution wrong.
And one of them is like protection of your education and cultural rights.
I think I've answered this question way too often. I don't want to sound repetitive. All I would say is, I don't think you should, see, take it for granted that we have a set of self-loathing Hindus among ourselves, and they are present in almost every institution.
Yes,
now,
sir.
but let me just make sure that I have not misunderstood the question. When you say targeting the community, you're talking of Muslims or Hindus? Ye clarify kar do.
So the both community.
You think both of them are being equally targeted?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, actually, please clear my narrative. So I will not watch these kind of channels and all, because I am myself is a history student.
ठीक है, okay. See, no, I think it's a fairly, I think, innocent question. I think it's a good question to ask. All I would suggest is this. All of us have had to go through a certain degree of self-realization, where after a point, we have had to give up the choices that we used to watch before. As a kid of the 90s, my go-to reference to watch the updates on Kargil war was NDTV in 1999 and 2000, because there were not too many options otherwise. Okay? Anybody from my generation will tell you that this is what we were watching. And all of us were crying when we saw Saurabh Kalia's dead body and how he was mutilated. So this is the product, let's say we are the product of this particular generation. But with time we realized, no, there is something seriously problematic. And I think for me the turning point was when Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee was delivering his speech after his government fell after 13 days. That was a fantastic speech. And then we saw how this speech was being reported by others. इस जर्नी में आपको मे बी थोड़ा बहुत सहायता मिल सकता है हम जैसे लोगों से, और मे बी लाइक अदर्स, बट इट्स अ जर्नी ऑफ सेल्फ रियलाइजेशन. नोबडी कैन क्लियर दैट लेंस फॉर यू, एंड इट इज नॉट माई प्लेस टू टेल यू ये देखो ये मत देखो. आई विल नेवर से दैट. आई एम नॉट गोना से दैट. आई वुड ओनली से इतना तो विवेक रखिए कि देखने के बाद आपको समझ में आए कि क्या सही है क्या गलत है. दैट्स ऑल आई वुड से. I am not going to stop you from reading any garbage piece of literature also. Padho. But you should know that you're reading garbage. That's all I'm saying. In none of my talks so far or my interactions have I said, don't read Romila Thapar, don't read this. I said, इसको पढ़ने के बाद अगर आपको लगता है कि यही सत्य है, तो मैं उनको जज नहीं करूंगा, आपको पक्का जज करूंगा. That's all I'm saying. Next. Yes, please. You, go on, please. Mic. It's not for my consumption, it's for the online audience consumption. Mic को और थोड़ा नज़दीक लेके जाइए. Yes, please.
Sir, myself Siddharth from Karnataka.
जी.
Myself.
हाँ.
So, Yeah, during the Kurda and all conflicts are going on, no? So on that day, I felt like these BDRs or leftist or rightist parties are sowing these seeds on young minds, so that it would be a communal disaster when they come to adulthood. No? So this would be a communal disaster to the country when they come to adulthood. What do you say on this?
Mrinal, can you just translate the question for me? Perhaps I have not been able to understand. Speak up, don't worry. Oh, you could not, okay.
The religiously intolerant seed that is sown in young minds grows into a giant volcano when they come to adulthood. Wouldn't it be a communal disaster for the country in the future?
Of course it would be.
So,
see, one of the things that, again I go back to his question was, do we change the curriculum that they read? Do we change what they are being taught in madrasas and other places? I'll give you a very clear constitutional peg. Okay, just open Article 25 on your mobile phones. Just एक बार Article 25 को open कर लीजिए please. And उसमें Article 25(2) जाइए. Just go to Article 25(2). Read out A, if possible. 25(2)(A). Yasho, read out. I don't have moles in the audience to clap for me. I know him well, that's all. Yeah, tell me. Can someone just pass on the mic so that he can read it out? Yeah, 25(2)(A, na? Yeah, padho usko.
Article 25(2)(A, regulating or restricting any...
Read it slowly like a lawyer. Respect the comma.
Regulating or restricting any economic, financial, political or other secular activity which may be associated with religious practice.
Article 25 is in the context of religious rights. Under 25(2)(A, India can do what France has done to see if in religious institutions political sermons are being given. Then the content of the sermons must be made public or they must be subject to vetting. Well, if someone feels that if this provision were to be applied to one particular group, it's wrong, let everybody present it to the government. No problem. They let people know what is being said for public consumption, what is being said for private consumption. Ye pata hona chahiye. And I would genuinely hope that in this generation we have more and more people who can read the Arabic script. Please read. It's extremely important to know what is being written in Nayi Dunya and all these newspapers, Milli Gazette and all these newspapers. We don't know. I absolutely don't know. So therefore I am bound to latch on to the most comfortable version of that particular newsprint, which is aired after pixelation of what is actually said. That has happened with history textbooks, that has happened multiple times. I have given live instances of how the content and the meaning is changed from Arabic to Urdu to English. Of the very same extract. So I hope nobody, let's say, shies away from reading this particular language. Arm yourself with it, equip yourself with it so that you're able to call it out when someone lies about it. So what can we do is, if the state is so interested in the finances of religious institutions and that too of one particular institution or one particular community, it must certainly be interested in political sermons being delivered across the board. Doesn't make a difference. But France seems to have the guts and the conviction to do it. Despite the, let's say, the amount of hatred and bile it's getting from across the world, from the so-called liberals. And we don't seem to have the guts to do it. Perhaps I think in that sense, Mr. Hemant Biswa Sarma's activities in Assam may be a good template to follow, because so far nobody has been able to challenge his policies and his measures on constitutional grounds. This is not the Congress 1885 conference, so there is no language barrier. अंग्रेजी में बोलने की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. You can even speak in Hindi. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, मेरा क्वेश्चन है कि जब भी मिसोजिनी, जेंडर डिस्क्रिमिनेशन या इन सारे सोशल मुद्दों पे बात होती है, तो हमेशा एक ही रिलीजन को टारगेट किया जाता है. और एक मतलब ये है कि अगर यहाँ पे रोमिनारो थापर, इरफान हबीब या मिस्टर दुग्गली आए होते तो जो भीड़ है वो चार टाइम्स ज़्यादा होती. तो सर मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि आप ऐसा क्या बता सकते हैं या हमको इंफॉर्मेशन दे सकती कि कौन सा हमको लिटरेचर रीड करना चाहिए, कौन सी चीज़ हमें देखनी चाहिए, या कौन सी बुक्स हमें पढ़नी चाहिए जो हिंदी रीडर्स और इंग्लिश रीडर्स को भी इक्विप करें, आम करें? थैंक यू सर।
देखिए, यहाँ पे स्टूडेंट्स ऑफ हिस्ट्री हैं, एंड आई एम अ सेल्फ टॉट स्टूडेंट, आई एम नॉट अ ट्रेन्ड स्टूडेंट. व्हाट आई हैव सेड इज़, अगर आप पहले पुस्तक के इंट्रोडक्शन को पढ़ेंगे तो वहाँ पे मैंने एक लिस्ट ऑफ ऑथर्स को मेंशन किया है जिनको पढ़ के मैंने सीखा है. All I would request you to do is to realize that the book has been written by a lawyer, which means almost every sentence has a meaning. So introduction को और थोड़ा गौर से पढ़िए. उसमें जितने भी ऑथर्स मुझे लगता है आप लोगों को पढ़ना चाहिए, उनका मैंने मेंशन कर रखा है. Please do that. That's one. But because of my language problem, I am limited by the fact that I've read only English authors. So my training in Tamil is about to start, which is my own mother tongue, and shamefully I don't know it. I know how to speak, but I don't know how to write and read, because I'm a product of undivided Andhra Pradesh. So I'm much more comfortable in the script of Telugu as opposed to Tamil. And therefore, I can at least say that there are two Bharatiya languages whose script and language and grammar I'm fairly comfortable with. One would be, of course, Telugu, the other being Hindi. Tamil I'm yet to learn. So the hope is that with time, I'm able to read the literature from my languages also. Okay. That's one of the reasons every time someone asks me, sir, 5 नुस्खे बता दीजिए ऐसे, भाई पहले अपने मातृभाषा को ठीक से समझो. Start with that. So maybe you start with those authors. उसके बाद usually what happens is, trust your mind to create its own wiring and maps after that. अपने आप वो आपको आगे का रास्ता बताएगा. Wait for that to happen. That's exactly what happened with me. My conviction comes from the fact that my journey has been largely self-taught. So my mistakes are equally mine as much as, let's say, the good parts. If possible, read those works. And today you have, of course, Vikram Sampath and Sanjeev Sanyal and others and Dr. Meenakshi Jain, इतने सारे लोग हैं, तो इनको तो पक्का पढ़िए. But you have to start from the previous works, because you have to realize it's not as if everything that was said in the past was right. But आपको evolution दिखेगा इस तरफ में भी और उस तरफ में भी. How we moved from, let's say, the belief in an Aryan invasion theory, even by the so-called Indic scholars, वहाँ से ये कितना change हुआ है, that you will see. It's important to understand this evolution. But your question is more from a beginner's perspective, so start from that, and then you see how you go along. A lot of people write to me asking, sir, how do I read this, how do I read that? I have only one request to make. I don't have the time to answer these questions one-on-one. All I would suggest is, my way of trying to tell you what perhaps you can consider doing is through the books and through the lectures. But read the books for a fact, for the simple reason that there is a decent chance that there is some kind of inconsistency between what I say in one speech and another speech, because it's a function of the question that is being put. But in the books, I'm trying to come out with a very coherent and consistent position. If somebody were to ask me which, let's say, work of yours we should go to for a clear picture of what you represent, what you stand for, I'd say my books are better than my speeches. Although the books are slightly more difficult to read. Language, मतलब वकील की language तो थोड़ा मुश्किल है, but I would still say read it. And I've said this about the second book. The first book was theory, the second book is straightforward AK-47. In the sense, I am not beating around the bush anymore, and I'm clearly presenting my positions with an open challenge to anyone saying, counter me on these facts. 1400 references I've thrown at your face. And I'm very confident of what I've written. This is not my arrogance speaking, this is not, let's say, my overconfidence speaking, but the amount of energy that has gone into writing these books and the amount of reading my team and I have done together, I'm very, very sure of one thing, that I can't be accused of distorting facts because I've extracted portions as is where is. ऐसा नहीं है कि एक लाइन यहाँ से निकाला, एक लाइन वहाँ से निकाला और उसको चिपका दिया. Primary sources को जितना हो सके मैंने वहाँ पे extract कर रखा है. This is the old school of writing of Jadunath Sarkar and R.C. Majumdar and Radha Kumud Mukherjee, who would extract those portions where they say यहाँ पे ये कहता है, so that people know ये कह रहा है या तुम्हारा interpretation है. That needs to come out. So that style of writing from the first book has still continued. So one of the things that I've also said about the books is it is an ode to all the scholars of the past who have not been given the credit that they deserved. ताकि लोग उनके कार्यों को पढ़ना शुरू करें. Next. How many more questions, Pranal, do we have time for? One more. So it's 7:30. Is it okay if we wrap it up at 7:45? Because I don't want them to feel shortchanged on this. Yes. Yes, boliye.
Hi, sir. This is Mukesh. I am basically a climate researcher.
Yes, please.
Sir, you know, with change in climate, the resource is going to be constrained, and then there will be a rise of terrorism or religious fanaticism to occupy the niche, occupy the resource through this kind of more polar kind of incidents. And this is happening, you know, in every pockets and corners of India, right? So what is your like silver bullet or anecdote solution by which the whole earth will you know, embrace Sanatana Dharma, not just from the Gandhara to Vietnam?
Do we have a copy of my first book? Can I just have it, please? I just want to read.
Hope you got my question, sir.
Of course I did. I hope I have. If I have not got the question, feel free to correct me. I think I'm blessed with an above average IQ. Just a second. So I think this is a good question, because what I've done is connected the question of climate change and nature as part of my discussion on coloniality. And this, I think, is in the chapter of coloniality, indigenous faiths and nature. What I've basically said is, thanks to the lockdown, COVID and so many such experiences, hopefully at some point, most societies would be forced to reconnect with nature through their pre-Christian, pre-Muslim cultures. And that, I said, should hopefully bring about the eco-friendly and nature-friendly nature of Sanatana Dharma in the first place, and why it is Sanatana and why it is needed. That's one thing. The second thing that I say from a more strategic perspective is, you know, one of the things that concerns me whenever we have these discussions on culture, civilization, is we will be occupied with demographics, we'll be occupied with all this. But the reality is, nature is going to bear the brunt of this demographic war. Resources are going to bear the brunt of this demographic war. So if you really want to protect nature, it's all the more imperative to reassert those cultures and ways of life which respect nature. So even if you come from a climate change perspective, dharma ka punarsthapan is anivarya. It is imperative.
Beautifully answered.
I hope that answers your question. Yes, please. Next. So we'll come to this lady and then we'll take others. Guli, please. Give her this.
Sir, I have one single question, but three parts of that question.
पिछली बार तो आपने जय श्री राम से शुरू किया था.
Jai Shri Ram, sir.
Good. Jai Shri Ram. Go on.
So the first bit is that you quoted about the third battle of Panipat and the fact that Indians, the so-called Indians, invited Ahmad Shah Abdali in 1761. Now, I agree with your argument that if you see it as your home, you won't invite, of course, an outsider to invade it. Right, sir. Noted. But again, it has a counter effect also. What we find in the first battle of Panipat. In 1526, it is said by scholars like Satish Chandra that it was in fact Rana Sanga
who
invited Babur.
Correct.
Now, how do we kind of understand this then? How is that coinciding there? Now, secondly, because it is something as a lesson which continues in our society today as well, that तुलसीदास जी ने बोला था, हिंदी में नहीं, अवधि और ब्रज में बोला था कि सुरनर मुनिजन की ये रीति स्वार्थ लाग करे सब प्रीति. It is the personal interest which guides a human. व्यक्ति निजी हितों से निदेशित होता है. So this concurs to the fact that Rana Sanga, in fact, actually kind of invited Babur. Secondly, so we are taught in history, even though I totally agree with you, what we are taught is something which is starkly opposite, of course, of whatever you mentioned. So we are taught in history that our Indic literature, which is the Charit literature, the Prashasti literature, was in fact inspired by the Timurid literature, which I find extremely erratic because of the fact that we had Prayag Prashasti, we had Harsha Charitra of Ban Bhatt, Prithviraj Raso of Chand Bardai, written far earlier than there were any mentions of any other thing.
Therefore, what's the question?
So, one more last.
Yeah, please go on. No, just go on.
So, sir, these arguments are pervading our student consciousness as of today. And you say that you want to create campus conversations as the last time as well.
Right.
So, these campus conversations, I have personally started to initiate, but what I see and what I said today as well, the war of words, the words of the left almost seem hypnotic. They influence the people more so, because just like you said something about the movie RRR, that seems more influential than the movie Kashmir Files. This is a fact, this is the reality. Then what should the argument really be, which is easier to deny rather than just justify, which has been long gone? Thirdly, and the third question is that you were again and again mentioning about Middle East, and there were a lot of arguments about that. I'm not quoting anything about that, but I'm just quoting about the nomenclature of it. Isn't the fact that we're calling it Middle East again a remnant of the fact that we have ingrained westernized perception? We're not calling it West Asia.
Correct.
We're calling it Middle East.
Correct.
That's it, sir.
Now, let me start with the first question on inviting a foreigner to, let's say, to collaborate with a foreigner and to fight. I'll give you 3 or 4 examples and then you think about it. Sit, please sit. So, Maulana Azad, during the course of the Khilafat movement, he was one of the foremost proponents of jihad and Khilafat movement, who was a direct student of Jamaluddin Afghani, who was the 19th century's foremost pan-Islamist scholar, who influenced Turkey, Egypt, Afghanistan, Bharat, and across the board. So when the question arose as to whether the Muslims of this country should collaborate with the Hindus to secure the goals of the Khilafat, he cites the Quranic explanation that Muslims collaborated with the Jews to fight against other group of non-Muslims. So therefore, he did not find a problem with collaboration with a group of non-Muslims as long as the fight is against another group of non-Muslims. Now, that's how he went about doing it. Now, let's compare how the Hindu side saw it, assuming that it saw itself as the Hindu side. Gandhi felt that if I were to collaborate with the Muslims in helping them with the Khilafat movement, I would have greater support from them in getting the dominion status from the British. Because the British were effectively saying, both of you are 2 different communities. Where is the question of a nation? How do I give you the dominion status? Because dominion status is only given for nations. So therefore, he wanted the Muslims on his side, and he thought, agar main inko help karta hu with respect to Khilafat, and that was his actual term of engagement with Maulana Abdul Bari. That's captured in his, let's say, in that particular conversation. Then he thinks that I will ultimately be able to address 2 things. One, bring down Hindu-Muslim conflict, and also show a much more united front to the British. You know, in both cases, the strategy is you work with someone else for strategic reasons in the hope that you deliver the larger goods. History now tells me that you cannot hope to collaborate with someone purely for strategic reasons when you know for a fact that his ultimate goal is to colonize you once more. In that sense, I would say perhaps Rana Sanga, assuming that my reading of that history is right, misread Babur. Or more than misreading one particular person, misread the mindset that was represented by this particular individual. Because it's almost as if there is an invisible button that is activated in crucial times. During the Battle of Tallikota, 1565, Vijayanagara versus the 5 Bahmani Sultans and all these people, Vijayanagara Empire, Ali Ramaraya had 2 Muslim generals. Suddenly a call for jihad was given. That's it. These people turn around, chop his head off, put it on a spike, and that's the end of the victory. And Ali Rama Rai was an old gentleman who almost was winning the battle and lost it at the fag end because there was a split within the ranks, thanks to these two Muslim generals. Now, therefore, I am constantly asking myself this question: is there hope for some kind of a collaboration at all, or hope for any kind of reform at all? Now, if you know for a fact that no matter what you do, one expansionist versus another expansionist, ultimately you are the target. The moment you realize this, it makes very little sense whatsoever to collaborate with either, unless you're absolutely sure that you have the ability to resist either both or one of them, should they turn together against you. From that perspective, if you look at it, I'm not looking at, let's say, Dehlavi's invitation to Abdali as an invitation of a foe to fight another foe, or one enemy to fight another enemy. He was inviting him primarily as a member of the Ummah. That's a different mindset altogether. His hope was, if I were to dangle Ummahhood in front of Abdali and promise him both the position of the Khalifa, along with the fact that he is going to be given heaven for killing all these infidels, can I give him enough incentive to bring him here? These were not the motivations of Rana Sanga. So don't look at it purely from the perspective of what the strategy employed was. The question is, end goal क्या है? और आप जिसके साथ आप partnership करना चाहते हैं, will he not ultimately turn on you? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. At the time of partition, we know what happened in Mirpur, when Hindus and Sikh generals were ultimately killed by their own colleagues in the Indian army. The Mirpuris are known for that. So with all this experience, any collaboration with one against the other must be only when you're absolutely sure that it is not blind faith collaboration. It's almost as if Gandhi was writing such compassionate letters to the Ali brothers when they were actually in, I think in the Chinchwada jail. He was expressing this fond hope of meeting them. Don't wallow in this emotional nonsense when you're actually staking the community survival and the country's survival on the anvils. Then you must be extremely alive to the consequences. वहाँ पे आपका personal investment नहीं हो सकता है, आपका detached investment होगा. That is the difference between Gandhi and Jinnah. One of the most successful home rule leagues run under Besant and Tilak was headed by you know whom? Jinnah, Bombay branch. Jinnah had dual membership until 1920 in Congress and the League. वहाँ पे बैठ के एजेंडा चलाओ, यहाँ पे बैठ के इनको ढीला करो. The man was fantastic at that. Only when he realized that the Congress was moving in the direction of non-cooperation, which would mean that he would have to take the position against the British directly, he left the Congress. You know why? The Muslim League's founding mentality was Aligarh Muslim University's founding mentality, that the British presence is needed to keep the Hindu power in check so that the Hindus never reclaim state power. So therefore, both Congress and the Muslim League were professing loyalty to the British. One was doing it so that the Hindus kept in check. The other was doing it because he wanted to be a colony of the British Empire. That's the difference. So collaboration karna hai to karo, but provided you know, when your own billy says meow, you should be able to kill the billy. Are you in a position to? Does history tell you you can? If the answer is a no, don't do it. Next. Yes.
Am I audible?
Then I'll come to you, don't worry.
जय श्री राम सर. सर मेरा सवाल आपके होम टाउन भाग्यनगर, मेरा प्रश्न आपके होम टाउन भाग्यनगर से ही रिलेटेड एक मुद्दे पे है, श्री राजा सिंह जी के संदर्भ में.
जी जी.
सर अभी हमने कुछ दिनों पहले देखा कि उनके भाषण पे विवाद हुआ.
जी.
उस पक्ष के, उस स्पेक्ट्रम के लोगों ने क्या कहा वो अलग बात है, वो एक्सपेक्टेड था. इस स्पेक्ट्रम से इवन यहाँ ऑडियंस में भी ऐसे लोग होंगे जो उनके भाषण की सब्सटेंस में जाते हुए कहते थे कि ऐसे नहीं कहना चाहिए था, या ऐसे नहीं करते, या ये शब्द नहीं यूज़ करते. एक टाइप का मॉरल बैलेंसिंग हम क्रिएट कर रहे हैं. मेरा सवाल सर आपसे भी है, यहाँ पे ऑडियंस है उनसे भी है. हम बुक्स पढ़ेंगे, हम एकेडमिया की बातें करेंगे, ठीक है. हम स्ट्रीट पे जाके राजा सिंह जैसे फुट सोल्जर्स जैसा वहाँ पे प्रॉब्लम के साथ एंगेज तो कर नहीं सकते.
करेक्ट.
नहीं कर सकते. हम बुक्स पढ़ेंगे, कोई बात नहीं. जब स्ट्रीट पे आपने एक स्पीच में कहा था पहले कि जब बात आएगी अल्टीमेटली तो इट वुड ट्रांसलेट टू कि हम स्ट्रीट पे क्या कर सकते हैं, स्ट्रीट पावर कितनी है हमारी। आज हम वहाँ पर खुद को खड़ा नहीं कर सकते। आपने कहा कि हम लोग भाग जाएंगे, अभी थोड़ी देर पहले कहा। तो जो लोग फुट सोल्जर्स हैं हमारे, जो हमारे लिए लड़ने के लिए तैयार हैं, हम उनको मॉरल बैलेंसिंग करके और पीछे धकेल देते हैं। Correct. या फिर उनका राइटियसनेस पे सवाल करते हैं कि इनके भाषण का कंटेंट ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए था, वैसा होना चाहिए था। Correct. तो सर ये कहाँ तक जायज़ है और ये कहाँ ले जा रहा है हमें एक सभ्यता के रूप में?
I genuinely believe that those foot soldiers who are happy to stand on the ground despite the state being against them, no matter kisi ka bhi government ho, and with the police against them, with let's say the other groups and their lawyers against them, should be respected to the core, because we fail to value their importance so much. It's only us who do. As a community, only we do this. You should see the constituency from which Raja Singh wins. It's such a difficult constituency for a Hindu to contest and win. The only other person who can pull off such a victory in that place is Sri Yogi Adityanath, who won from Western Uttar Pradesh. Nobody else can do this. Very few people can do this. 3, I always say this, आपका frame of reference आपके air conditioned atmosphere नहीं हो सकता है। वहाँ पे इंडिया इंटरनेशनल सेंटर में डिस्कशन नहीं हो रहा है। वहाँ पे लड़ाई चल रही है कि भाग्यलक्ष्मी मंदिर, जिसके बेसिस पे भाग्यनगर नाम पड़ा था, उसका एक्सेस मिलेगा कि नहीं मिलेगा। And you should see the sheer numbers the man commands. Okay, that tells you that that lone warrior not only has the guts but also has the magnetic pull to ensure that he has massive mass support. Such people, if they were from the other side, would have been worshipped. Okay? Now in this sense you also have to realize, having said that, you also have to learn something else. Notwithstanding my disagreements and fundamental, let's say, gulf which will never be bridged with Mr. Owaisi and his brother, the fact of the matter is, you don't have Hindu Owaisis at this point. Too many. You can only count them. What they have done for their community and the manner in which they champion their community's causes without an iota of being shamed by the media is something for us to learn from. I say this not because I admire the mission that they have set out for, but I want such people on our side. See, you have to realize, Raja Singh's biggest paralysis is that he does not have the same kind of support that Akbaruddin Owaisi had when he made such nasty statements about Kaushalya Ma and Sita Ma. We are immediately looking for his mistakes. The other side literally gets away with murder, makes all kinds of statements. There is no difference between the statement made before the Rangila Rasool article was written against Sita Ma and what Akbaruddin Owaisi ultimately said in 2012. No difference whatsoever. But the kind of, let's say, support that they gave, nobody in his community was sitting and telling, "Aapko ye nahi bolna chahiye tha, wo nahi bolna chahiye tha," nothing of that sort. Because he knows what is to be done on the street. स्ट्रीट का मापदंड एसी नहीं हो सकता है या एकेडमिक कैंपसेस नहीं हो सकते हैं. Even within academic campuses, can you compare DU with JNU? Can you compare DU with TISS or Ashoka University? Within academia, अगर इतना सारा diversity है, how on earth are we doing this? This is what I call the how do I put it? The elitization of the Hindu mind. हर चीज को आप सिर्फ एक अंग्रेजी पंथी से देखते हैं. Because you are thinking, अरे नहीं अंग्रेज होते तो हमारे बारे में क्या सोचते हैं? क्या सोचते हैं मतलब क्या है? वहां पे ब्रैडफोर्ड में अभी क्या हो रहा है? बर्मिंघम में क्या हो रहा है? उसका जवाब है उनके पास. They don't. So don't immediately ask yourself, what would the Khan market elites think of this particular leader? Makes no difference. The Khan market elites don't matter. This leader matters for your survival. As far as people of Bhagyanagar are concerned, anybody who knows the painful history of Hyderabad, I use the word Hyderabad, should actually ask, can the TRS as a political party ally with the Oasis. The people of Telangana were the ones to bear the brunt of the atrocities committed by the Nizam, either through, let's say, taxes. He didn't become the richest man because of the wealth being generated in that particular place. It was on the backs of the peasants. If there is a communist movement in the heartland of Telangana, it is because of the peasant rebellion that was started against the Nizam. So when that is happening, and it is being led by a particular party, which should actually be saying, I'm sorry, I'm not going to ally with people who would strip women on Hindu festivals and make them do their traditional dance naked during Dasara. This is the history. The Hindu population was used as the hostage population at the time of Operation Polo. The private militia of the Nizams, the Razakars, would come with serrated knives, looking for people to kill, would tie the men together and watch and make the rest of the family watch as they were burnt. All kinds of atrocities were committed. You finally have one man standing up to them. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give up on that person at all for the Khan market elites. I relate more to this fellow than to anybody else.
हेलो हेलो सर, हेलो एवरीवन। सर, आज के दौर में आप सही हैं या गलत है, इससे ज़्यादा महत्वपूर्ण है कि आप अपनी साइड का क्या नैरेटिव लोगों को देते हैं। वहीं पर जहां यूनिफॉर्म में हिजाब को इंक्लूड ना करने पर उसे कल्चर अटैक कहा जाता है, वहीं सबरीमाला को एक जेंडर इशू बना देते हैं। तो सर, मेरा क्वेश्चन आपसे है कि हाउ टू विन द बैटल्स ओवर नैरेटिव्स।
See, if the last few years are anything to go by, इतना तो आप भी मानते हैं कि ओपिनियन में थोड़ा बहुत बदलाव तो आया है। जितने लोगों को सबरीमाला के बारे में ज़्यादा पता नहीं था, at the very least there is a bit of a divided house today. And that's not because of my efforts alone or anything else. A lot of people have spoken on it. So I have believed that two things help. एक है सत्य का आपके पक्ष में होना तो ज़रूरी है, but most importantly उसको रखने का तरीका जो है वो बहुत ही important है. So I think as a society which has produced great storytellers and great orators, you should be looking for articulate ambassadors of your points of view, not just in English but in every language possible. Which means कोई street पे लड़ेगा, कोई media house में लड़ेगा, कोई academics में लड़ेगा, कोई policy level पे लड़ेगा. You need to be able to create people at every level. And the messaging of that entire narrative, or let's say that entire position, is very, very important. The difference between the Hindu side and the Muslim side is this. Hindu side will change its position to meet the audience. The other side will retain its position and justify it despite the audience. वो अपने position को नहीं बदलेंगे. Whether it's triple talaq or even halala, whatever it is, they will find ways to justify it. You will not even justify something that is fundamentally justifiable, and they will justify everything that is fundamentally indefensible. This is not a sign of, it's not a question of lack of knowledge, it's not a question of, let's say, lack of position in your favor. Two things. एक तो रीढ़ की हड्डी, दूसरा the ability to articulate. Both are equally important. So on college campuses, use this as, let's say, your training grounds to be able to articulate your positions through holding flagship events on hot potato issues where you can come out with the best of arguments possible. So in the legal fraternity, sometimes what you do is that an issue which is live and pending before, let's say, a court of law, इसको आप एक simulated problem की तरह students के सामने रखते हैं ताकि आपको पता चले कि अगर young researchers are given an opportunity to argue on the very same subject, उनके तरफ से तर्क क्या निकल सकता है और उनके तरफ से arguments क्या निकल सकते हैं. It's important to do that. So two things are achieved in that. One, effectively you get a fresh pair of eyes and brains to actually look at it. The second thing is, you're also involving the larger community on these issues and you're forcing them to take a position. Because आप debate में participate तो करेंगे and you may think it's just a debate, but those positions will leave an impact on you. So use your campuses creatively to be able to push the very same points of view and to produce fantastic articulators of your positions. Whether you ultimately get down to the street, उसकी नौबत आए या ना आए, at the very least you should have the ability to speak and present your position without having to stutter and sputter and stammer like an engine in winter. Don't do that. Okay, that is what is important. When you start firing, the other side should run for cover. They should not know, ab iska muh khul gaya, maru. That's it. Run from this place. The moment you start talking, they should say game's up. That is the window that you should be looking for, and that's the kind of people that you should produce. If I may say so, with a lot of humility, the goal is to try and replicate this model through personal experience, so that people see you don't need to be an activist to take these positions. I can very well and right royally do justice to my professional commitments and also do this. That's the model that I'm trying to create. If people think that I'm leading some bitter, sad life like a jhola chap looking for money here and there, no, not at all. I don't need anybody for anything. I can take care of myself. At the same time, I can step into the ground and support this particular movement. That's what we need. People who can 2 times, so to speak, as far as this is concerned. I don't mean personal lives, I'm just saying this. So I'm saying you need to be able to, let's say, establish yourself professionally and also bring that entire thing to bear on this. Because then they'll say, he's an expert on a particular subject. I'm sure he's not fibbing or faffing. He knows what he's talking about. How many people can discount what I say today unless until they have the ammunition to come after me? I've said this in multiple places. So I would suggest that as opposed to calling me on a regular basis for this, it makes no difference to your lives. It makes no difference to, let's say, the narrative. Start projecting student leaders and student ambassadors. The new generation, the next level of talent must be produced here. Is there a way that you can enthuse your participants to coming out with fantastic articles when there is a protest or a live issue? How many people are actually writing in newspapers and other places? ये करना ज़रूरी है. Social media में हर बार चिल्लाने से काम नहीं चलता है. You need to be able to articulate it in the right platforms. I will help people get the platform if they don't get a platform. But content आपके तरफ से आना चाहिए. तैयारी आपके तरफ से आनी चाहिए. I leave it to their discretion. I'm not going to stop. I leave it to their discretion. No.
Okay,
even
though we have a ton of questions, we would have to wrap up because of the paucity of time. In the last, on an ending note, I'll just say, sir, even if you say that it makes no difference to us and we do not get affected, sir, I'll have to again quote Ramcharitmanas. There in Kishkinda Kand, in the last, what happens is that the Vanar Sena faces the wide ocean, the Dhanush Kodi Tat, and they realize that they can't cross the ocean and they don't have the powers requisite to do so, even though they have to fulfill the wish of Ramji to go across and meet Sita ji. Now what happens is that even Hanumanji feels the same thing. And then it is Jamvant, Reechpati Jamvant, who makes Hanumanji realize his powers and kind of wakes him up from the sleep of not realizing his own powers. And sir, this is the same analogy that I'll give to your works and books as well.
Jambavan was among the oldest characters in Ramayana.
Yes, sir.
So I've been reminded of my age.
Yes, sir, because आपका वक्तव्य हमारी भारतीय सभ्यता रूपी अनभिज्ञ हनुमान को अपनी शक्तियों से अवगत कराने में निमित्त तो हुआ ही है, और ये एज शेविंग बिल्कुल भी नहीं है. Okay, but now ending, we'll like to call upon Siddharth to give away the vote of thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir, for gracing us.
Well, it's my honor to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the Bharat Book Club and Historical India. But before I do so, as our standard practice, I would like to put forward the future course of action of Historical India and the Bharat Book Club. On 12th September 2022, the historiography series, that's another initiative of Historical India, would be organizing its fourth lecture. It's titled Ancient Indian Texts, History and Knowledge Traditions at the Seminar Hall of Hansraj College, University of Delhi. The lecture shall be delivered by Professor Hiraman Tiwari, the Dean of Center for Historical Studies, JNU. Historical India, in collaboration with INTAC, that's the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, have worked upon a plan to organize a heritage walk in the university and its vicinity on a tentative date of a Sunday morning of 25th September. The process of identification, mapping, archiving and other needful shall be completed before the due date, and we also invite students to join this process along with the heritage walk. Historical India has received a confirmation from a famed and senior archaeologist Dr. K.K. Mohammed, to organize his talk in the University of Delhi in coming October. To our utmost pleasure, this very morning we received a confirmation from Dr. Vikram Sampath, allowing us to host two events. The first shall be on his magnum opus, Volumes on Savarkar. First volume, Echoes from a Forgotten Past, and the second volume, A Contested Legacy. And the second shall be the book launch event of his new book that's coming, that's Brave Hearts of Bharat, Vignettes from the Indian History. Adding to the high-profile tours of our campus, we are overwhelmed by another confirmation by Padma Shri Dr. Meenakshi Jain, most probably for her new book releasing in a few months, probably in November. Coming to research-centric projects, it is an honor to announce a very new project today in collaboration with Niti Manthan on Bharat's ancient law and jurisprudence. This not only requires scholars involved in the study of law, but also essentially history, political science, sociology, philosophy, Sanskrit, and several disciplines, making history multidisciplinary. We had announced the Total History of India project in last particular session that we have conducted with Professor Kapil Kumar for Netaji Azad and Sarkar and Fauj. The applications to join this particular project shall be out by September 8, and it shall be carried out in assistance with the Nehru Memorial. The data generated through this particular project, though shall be used in several of our endeavors, but it shall also be applied to curate a particular museum in the Pratap Gaurav Kendra, Udaipur. The project on the history of University of Delhi announced earlier shall also commence on the very day of the DU Heritage Walk. The process of research, creation of articles, their ever-evolving phase of edition, authentication, indexing on search engines, promotion through search engine optimization, and thus creating out and reaching out to masses only sums up the tangible digital function of a wiki. And that is what we do. This is something we do once in a fortnight, but actually we have been editing and researching and compiling, and not just compiling, even generating new data every day, every single day. And this arena not only requires contemplation farther than the possible limit of sight, but seeks for expansion and vision every single day. Therefore, we call upon dedicated, intelligent, intellectual youth who can come through this and come forward and join us in our journey to make a mark. Finally, I would like to express our gratitude to Advocate Sai Deepak sir for letting us host the very first event of his book tour in the University of Delhi. We thank our Joint Proctor, Professor Manoj, Deputy Proctor, Dr. Saurabh, and HOD History, Ramjas College, and our Historical India DU mentor, Professor Vikas Verma, for gracing this event. We thank Yuva and Advaita for joining us for this particular event, and we are also thankful to Bloomsbury and Voice of India publication. Their stalls are just out. You can purchase and just look through that, browse the particular text after this particular event for setting up their book-stalls. We thank the Historical India team for putting in continuous efforts to organize this particular event, and finally we express our utmost gratitude to all of you seated in the audience, having taken out precious time to attend this particular session. We hope this was a fruitful exercise, and we promise to continue having such enlightening sessions in the future. We look forward to your support there as well. I would now request you all to please stand for the national anthem.
Just a second, I just had 2 points to make. So a huge round of applause for the student organizers for this particular event. Whether you buy copies of my book or not, please make sure that you buy copies of Voice of India publication as well as Gita Press, because they have kept the Hindu voice and the Sanatana voice alive for all these generations. Please make sure that you buy those books.
National anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब